Hi, welcome. Welcome, welcome. And there's already confusion. We're like 10 seconds into the live stream. So I just scheduled the the live stream for next week, and people are now wondering what's going on. So it's me messing with technology, and you would think that I would learn to not just don't I just need to not touch anything ever. Ever. It just gets so bad so fast. But we're here. The live stream is going on tonight, and yes. So I was just trying to schedule it for next week. Sorry for the confusion. Cecilia's here. Helene is here. Danny's here. Shara is here. Katie, welcome, welcome. Lucy, hey Lucy. Carmen. So for those of you that are new here, welcome. For those of you that are not new here, welcome. My name is Dana, and this is a live stream question and answer, kind of just general support and light and love session that we do every Wednesday night at 8:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. It runs for, I don't know, it just depends, 2.5-ish hours. And how this goes is feel free to ask any question that's on your mind. There's no such thing as a bad question or a dumb question or anything. This is all about us just asking questions and getting validation and getting clarity. And so if you're watching this, if you're not live, there's a chat that goes on during these live streams. And so there's quite a few people that participate in it, and they give their input as well. So it's, if you're watching these videos after the fact, it's just kind of my 2 cents. But if you're in the chat, then you get the benefit of, or even if you're just in the live stream and you're watching the chat, you get the benefit of lots of different people's opinions. So that's always kind of fun. Elizabeth says she's new here, but watches all the time. Well, welcome. So Gina is here, hasn't been on the live stream in a while. My goodness. Okay. Her daughter passed away, it sounds like, but she's back again, so welcome. I'm so sorry for your loss. Yeah, she says, I can't believe how much this group has grown in the last few months. It's been crazy. Yes, it really has grown a lot. And Donna says, can a narcissist fake evaluations with the forensic counselor? Yes. Yes, they can. The ones that have insight into their problematic behavior, some of them hide it really well, and some of them don't at all. And if you have a person in your life that's incredibly manipulative and incredibly insightful, and they realize like a lot of their behaviors more, like they're more aware of it, then yeah, they can go to great lengths to hide it. They can oftentimes, pass lie detector tests and all kinds of things. So, and this also assumes that the forensic counselor or the counselor in general is super familiar with manipulative people and with narcissism. Narcissism is one of those personality disorders that I think is largely misunderstood, and it's only the extreme cases of it that even get diagnosed. And by extreme cases, I mean incredibly overt, like Napoleon or, what was it, King Louis, just really, really extreme, Donald Trump, really extreme cases. So anybody that doesn't fit that way over the top type of personality profile for narcissism tends to not get diagnosed. So if they're not coming across as grandiose, if they're not coming across as arrogant or ridiculously egotistical, then it can be really tricky for them to diagnose, especially if you've got a narcissistic person who can say all the right things, because some narcissists can't. Like, they are so deep, they're so lost in themselves that they can't even, they won't apologize. They get in, they walk in the door and that counselor is like, oh, buddy, I got your number, or what would be the female version of buddy? Budette? Budette, I've got your number too. So they can see the real obvious ones coming. But unfortunately for a lot of us, if the person has that Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde personality where they come across as really covert and really charming and convincing, it can really fool a therapist or a professional at any level. Connie says, hi, Dana. First time I've listened live, but I've been following you for about 2 years now. Well, cool. Welcome. So, oh, I like that. Trisha. Trisha says, Dana, I'd like to see you start to focus, where did it go? On ways to thrive after we rid ourselves of the narcissists in our life. I like it. I like it. I like it. I like it. I can for sure do that. We can even start talking about that tonight. I think that's like a very worthy topic of conversation. Let me writing this down. So I can come back to it. I get so nervous on these live streams that I forget what I'm saying and I have trouble thinking. It takes me a while to get into the groove of these, which is weird because I've been doing this for over a year and you would think that it would be no big thing. And it's still it's still very nerve-wracking every single week. I'm waiting for the day that it's not. Helene says, Dana, your post about deal breaker behavior in the support group today truly helped me sit down and think about things. It is insane how managed down my boundaries were. Abuse, addiction, adultery, and attitude. Yes. And I think sometimes it helps to have, when we lose track of what's normal, which is very common when you've got a narcissistic person in your life, whether it's a parent and you grew up with this, or it's a partner later on in life, or it's both. And it can help to just kind of get some grounding as far as what's workable behavior, what's deal breaker behavior for other people. And then obviously to think critically about that and then make up your own mind about kind of where you fit in with that. But I'm glad that was able to help give you some clarity and some validation that yes, in what you were in fact was experiencing was very problematic. So good. Carmen says, can a narcissist be bipolar too? I'm asking because of the mood swings they have. Sure, most people don't just have one thing going on in general. Like if a person could have a mental illness, like they could be bipolar, and they could have a personality disorder, and they could have diabetes and high blood pressure and cancer and Alzheimer's. And so people are complex, and there's a lot of different things that can go on within anybody. So however, what you're describing, because I get this question a lot, not necessarily with could they be bipolar, but more of like, well, I guess that one, could they be bipolar or could they be autistic? And the answer is they could be that. But if you're experiencing abusive behavior where people are running really hot and cold, because that tends to be the pattern of an emotional abuser, that is generally not so much bipolar or autism. That's more of kind of what's going on inside of them. Like it's more their mindset and it's more just kind of how they're wired. A great book that we did for book club a long time ago. It was one of the first books I did. I think my notes on it, I'll have to check and see where my notes are, but it's a fantastic read. I highly recommend it. It's called The Verbally Abusive Relationship by Patricia Evans. And she talks a lot about this, how they do just all of a sudden snap and they tend to run really hot and cold. And, my guess is, kind of more of what's going on with that is it's these there are perceptions of being challenged or being criticized. Because sometimes it's real. Like, you might see that narcissistic injury flare up when you do question them. Where were you? Or what happened to the money in the bank account? Or are you cheating on me? Or who's this other person? Or what are we having for dinner? Right? Like, any little thing that they perceive to be a criticism that can cause that hot, cold mood, like out of the blue. But where it gets really weird is when we don't feel like we've said anything, but they've interpreted it to be an attack on them. And so then that rage that we're experiencing, it's that narcissistic rage, which happens when there's a narcissistic injury caused. But sometimes, because everybody's triggers are different. And so they might be getting triggered by something that's not something obvious. So you could have said, hey, what are we having for dinner tonight? And they could interpret that as, oh, what, you don't think I'm a good cook? You don't think I'm a good provider? And they could totally take that as a personal attack, and that was not even the intention. So this is what I'm like, a lot of this stuff it's within them, and we can't even begin, there's not enough eggshells in the world that we can walk on in order to get them to change their behavior, because it's within them. Read that book. It's fantastic, and she talks a lot about that. Hart says, can a narcissist fake empathy? It depends on how aware they are. So some of the less aware ones can't. Like, those are the ones that they'll never say they're sorry. They are like the very obviously overt narcissists. They can't even hide it. They're so arrogant. They're so grandiose. They're so full of themselves. They're so just their behavior is just so ridiculous that it's very clear that they only think about themselves. And their lack of empathy, their lack of remorse, their level of entitlement, their amount of like justifications for their behavior, all of that is just there. It's on the surface. But some of them can hide it really well, really well. And those are the ones where it can take a person years, if not decades, to really realize what they're dealing with, because they can say all the right things. They can say, I'm sorry. They can they can do all of that future faking, making promises of change, saying, I'll go to therapy. I want things to work. I love you. And it's just talk, 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 talk. And the reason it takes a person so long to really see them for who and what they are is that they tend to keep going around the same mountain over and over again. Because what happens is that person keeps getting better and better at hiding their problematic behavior. So their partner thinks, oh, we've turned a corner, and now this person's no longer going to be lying or cheating or siphoning funds or yelling or hitting or, kind of doing whatever, putting me down or running really hot and cold. They're no longer going to be doing this. But then they get better at hiding their problematic behavior, or they get better at blaming their target for their problematic behavior. Or blaming in general, like blaming their childhood. They come up with all kinds of excuses, right, as to why it's not really their fault. And so it's important. Pay attention to actions. Like, actions will show you everything that you need to see, especially actions over a prolonged period of time, because anybody can be on their best behavior, right? But it's whether or not who a person is over a long period of time that'll really tell you what you're dealing with. So Wendy says, I am new here and I love your videos. Well, welcome, Wendy, and I'm so glad. Thank you. Thank you. I have fair warning, I have technology issues almost every single time I do a video. So, and tonight I meant to mention I have a new microphone, yet again, adding to my collection. So I hope that this one is better than the one I used last week. we'll see. We'll find out tomorrow. People are pretty good about letting me know in the comments as to microphone issues. Little Miss is talking about Trump, and she says, I have nightmares every night. It sucks waking up not knowing what he tweeted or what his next executive order is. You know, I think a lot of people, actually, I know a lot of people are struggling with this because I get messages about Trump on a regular basis, and how a lot of people feel re-victimized, that a person, politics aside, talking just about personality, that a person with his problematic personality could have gotten elected. Somebody that, I mean, there's no shortage of like wildly outrageous deal breaker behavior, and it's very concerning and alarming for me too. And I am to the point now where I don't even watch the news, because all it's going to do is upset me. Like, there's not a whole lot that we can do at this point. You know, he's going to be in office for 4 years, or until he gets impeached, or until something else happens. So, you know, all we can do is try to make the best of it. And unfortunately, this last election, I think a lot of people felt this way. It didn't seem like a choice. It felt like a dilemma. Like, who do you vote between? Like the snake you can see, or the snake in the grass? And, you know, hopefully Trump will kind of, I don't know. He's got some good qualities. He's stubborn. He's passionate. I think he's a good businessman. He's a good leader. In a sense, it's concerning because of that high level of narcissism, where he's going to take that. So I sincerely hope that it kind of gets more on track, and that he's able to use his powers for good. But we'll see. Katie says, do you have any recommendations for screening counselors to help people who've dealt with narcissistic abuse? I always encourage people, call a few of them, and ideally talk to them, not their secretary, not another counselor. Like, talk to that person that you're going to be meeting with, and see what kind of rapport or vibe you get over the phone. And I would ask them, the term narcissistic abuse it's not in the DSM. It's not commonly known. Like, what we're talking about in these videos is emotional abuse, and it's psychological abuse generally, verbal abuse, and then there's some other types of abuse too. It's not widely known as narcissistic abuse. So it would be good to find a counselor that's familiar with abuse, specifically emotional and psychological abuse. And so when you call and you talk to them, letting them know, I just got out of a, psychologically abusive or an emotionally, generally they go hand in hand, right? Emotionally abusive relationship. And, are you familiar with this? Have you ever worked with somebody before in this? I'm really feeling that my partner was highly narcissistic. Because some counselors get hung up and they're like, well, we don't know if your partner was a narcissist, like he wasn't diagnosed or she wasn't diagnosed with that. And so if you're feeling like you're having to fight to be heard, or you're having to fight to be validated as far as what you experienced, that's a problem. Like, you really want to be able to find a therapist that you feel comfortable with, that you can be open, honest, sincere, and solutions oriented with. Personally, I'm a big fan of people doing individual counseling and getting into several support groups, because there's a couple of reasons for this. So one, counseling is great, but it's generally 1 hour a week. And when a person's getting out of a narcissistically abusive relationship, they oftentimes need a lot more than that. It's very much like deprogramming from a cult. And it takes a lot more than 1 hour a week. Not to mention, just meeting with one person, it's kind of, there's a million different ways that a person, if they've never gone through it, if they've never, it's a lot. It's a lot to kind of expect for a counselor to really be everything that you need during this time. And even in a support group, it can be hard to kind of get everything that you need to get because there's so many people in there. But I feel like support groups can really be a great way because it can give a person, it gives you the benefit and the validation and the clarity from hearing from all of these other people. So they're going to be bringing up issues that you might not have ever even realized were issues. You might have thought, oh, I thought that was just me, or I thought that was really just unique to my family or to my partner or to, what have you. So there's a lot of clarity and validation that can come in support groups, not to mention the online ones run 24 hours a day. So it can be really fantastic. It's a really great place to learn and to ask questions and to really process things, and then to do a deeper dive in individual counseling. So personally, that's how I think these things work best, is in combination. And like I mentioned with support groups too, I think it's important for people to join a few of them because they're all run in different ways, and you might find that you resonate more with certain groups than others. Certain groups might be a lot more active than other groups, and you might also realize or decide, you know what, I feel like I kind of want to explore some issues in my childhood. Maybe you had a narcissistic parent. It can be good to get into a support group for, children of narcissistic parents or narcissistic mothers or whatever the case might be. And then a support group for what you're going through with your current person in your life. Okay, let me scroll down here. Eveline says, kickboxing is so empowering. I highly recommend it. I like that. And it's good for you too. Any type of exercise, it not only burns off that anxious energy, it stimulates all kinds of dopamine and like feel-good chemicals that can really help a person just process all of this and stay focused and stay grounded. And realize too, so back to therapists real quick. Finding a good professional in any field, it can take a little bit. So, it's like finding a good realtor or a good financial planner or a good hairstylist or a good mechanic or kind of what have you. It's pretty much the exact same. So if you can find a good one, they're worth their weight in gold, right? But if you can find a bad one, you're like, oh, it costs time and money. And again, this is why I think support groups can be really helpful, because if you're feeling like you're not getting anywhere in therapy, or you're experiencing kind of weird things in therapy, or you're just kind of uncertain, it can be validating to go back to the support group and say, hey, you know what, this is kind of what's going on, and what do you guys think about this, or kind of what have you, just to get that added validation. I would really like to start a list of different therapists that I know. Maybe I'll work on that sooner than later, that are willing to do like Skype sessions or what have you, that I know are familiar, because there's quite a few of them that do recommend my videos and my support group to their clients, because they realize like they're there, but they're only there for 1 hour a week, and there's so much stuff that goes on, the other, what is it, like 167 hours in the week. And so it would be nice to be able for me to kind of get a network of people that I do feel confident in saying, you know what, yes, this person really knows what they're talking about. I'll think about that. I'll think about how to go about doing that. Oh, that's so fantastic. Gina says, I know many people have asked about EMDR therapy in the past, and I've wondered myself. I've only been to 3 sessions, and it's been amazing so far. If you guys can do it, I'd highly recommend it. And then Cecilia says, I agree, Gina. I've had success with EMDR too. Awesome. I love it. Thank you guys so much for reporting back about that. That is something that I would like to do as well. Donna asks, hey Dana, does acupuncture help with PTSD? Interesting that you would ask that. I recently read a book, and I'm not sure which one it is. If it's The Body Keeps the Score, or I don't know. I read a lot. It was some book I read that had to do with trauma and processing trauma. And yeah, they had found that one of the more helpful therapies, interestingly enough, was acupuncture. And same, well, it's very similar to the EMDR and the EFT, the tapping therapy. And kind of the science behind EFT, same with acupuncture, has to do more with kind of, I don't know, it sounds so hippie woo-woo, but like releasing energy blocks within the body. And so the thought, if I understand it correctly, the thought process is that trauma creates these kind of emotional explosions within our body, and they can get stuck. And so if it blocks a certain, I don't know, energy meridian or what have you, then everything gets off or gets out of whack. So to me, that's very interesting. And I think that kind of level of research with all of it is still very much in its infancy, but I've heard amazing things from people that have gone through EFT therapy. I haven't heard anybody that's done acupuncture for PTSD, but I would imagine if EFT is successful, then acupuncture would be too. I was reading an article recently about EMDR because the whole concept of it has to do with eye tracking and the way that it kind of helps the brain process memories and events. And recently they were saying that they're thinking that the eye tracking isn't even as significant as was once thought. That it's more of kind of the different things, the repatterning, the reframing of what happened that helps a person actually more effectively process those emotions. It's interesting stuff. I would be interested to talk to an EFT or EMDR or even acupuncturist and find out what they have to say about it. Let me make a note of that. I like that. EFT. Okay. So Hart says, can you please explain somatic narcissists? This topic is not covered often, but many of us are victims of it. So there's several different unofficial subcategories of narcissists. And the subcategories are mainly kind of what is their primary hook? How do they normally hook supply? Like, what are they normally after? How do they get their ego fed? Is probably a better way to put it. So you have cerebral narcissists, you have somatic narcissists, you have, there's delusional, there's vulnerable, there's more of, I think, just the grandiose. I'm trying to think of some other types that I've heard of. Those are the main ones that come to mind. So the somatic ones are ones that are very somatic comes from the word soma. Soma refers to the body. So they're very physical oriented. So sex is a big weapon for them. They tend to be very focused on their physical appearance, very focused on other people's physical appearance. There tends to be a lot of physicality in the relationship, lots of attention, lots of affection, lots of sex, lots of just, that's how they get those ego needs met. Oftentimes with somatic narcissists, there's a lot of cheating, there's a lot of sex addiction, there's a lot of it's really outrageous type behavior. Because for them, with narcissists, it's like there's this empty emotional bucket, and they can't, for whatever reason, it was never filled, or it wasn't filled in a healthy way when they were younger. This is kind of the theory behind it. And so the bucket, it's like it has a hole in it. And so a person can give and give and give, and it's just goes right out the bottom. And so a person, if you're dealing with any type of a narcissistic person, you can't give enough, because there's a hole in their bucket. So with a somatic narcissist, you could give them compliments all day long. Like, you could have sex multiple times a day. I mean, it's never enough for them. But their behavior, it's not a reflection of you. It's like it never is, right? Every person's behavior is always a reflection of them. It's never a reflection of somebody else. So with them, it's a reflection of what's going on inside of them. And for a lot of partners, that they continue to get cheated on, or they get caught up with somebody where they have this amazing physical connection, and they have a really hard time overcoming it. It's because those types of somatic narcissists really do a great job of creating that intense physical connection, but it's not real. I hope that helps. Diane says, "Oh my gosh, Dana, you are explaining that perfectly, how they perceive what you say as a personal attack. It's so very difficult to deal with." Yes, and confusing, right? And so I think when a lot of people are talking about, they're like, I don't know if this person's bipolar or like what's going on, because they were fine, and then now all of a sudden they're not talking to me. And I asked them if they needed help carrying the groceries in, or like it's just bizarre, because they're being triggered. And Patricia Evans, I think the book that I was thinking of where she talks about this is something to do with controlling people. I don't know. She's written several books. She's fantastic. I really enjoy her work. But she talks about how it's like, actually, how she describes it is that abusive people are wired, that abusive mindset is wired differently than a normal mindset. And that in their mind, they view other people, especially their target, as like, she uses the description as like a teddy bear. So that the teddy bear is like this projection of them. So like a child views a teddy bear as them. So the teddy bear has all of the same thoughts and feelings and actions and emotions and likes and dislikes. The teddy bear is them. And so narcissistic people view the same with their target. And so that's why their target's not allowed any individuality. Like, you can't disagree with them. You can't confront them. You can't challenge them. You can't have any hobbies they don't approve of. You can't have any thoughts or feelings or anything that they don't approve of, because they don't understand that. Like, they need, like, to them, it's like, well, I need you to be what I need you to be. And so this is weird. Like, this is weird that you're an individual and that you're not agreeing with me on everything. And this is how and why people feel so ground down, because it's that mindset of, really, it's a kind of a me versus you mindset, but it's the idea of the world should be exactly how I think it should be. And if it's not, then other people just need to change. They need to fit inside this box. And that's why we're like, again, like, you might say, oh, I think I really want to I really want to go get my nails done, or I really want to take up, I don't know, Chinese cooking. And they freak out, and because in their mind, they wouldn't want to go get that done, or they don't like it when women wear nail polish. I don't know. Just, and so because they don't like it, they would assume that, well, obviously, like, that nobody else should like it either, that my way is the right way and it's the only way. But again, like, there's not enough eggshells a person can walk on. Like, you lose your whole sense of identity trying to conform into being what this other person wants you to be. And many people, after years or decades of being, and not even that long, I mean, it can take just weeks or months of being around a person that's so stifling, that's grinding you down, to where when a person gets out of this, they're like, I don't even know who I am anymore. I don't know, maybe I'm the problem. Maybe I'm abusive or manipulative or difficult or too sensitive, or I don't even know. And because they're so, it's a little bug still. They're so confused by what they're experiencing, because it's confusing, especially if you've never experienced it before, where you're like, wait a minute, like, this person was totally fine. Like, the good times are good, but man, when the bad times are bad, they're bad, and they're really weird, and they're very confusing, and I don't know who the problem is. And it's a big, not only a red flag, but it would be wise to make it a deal breaker if you have to erase who you are in order to make somebody else happy. That's highly problematic. And so a lot of people, when they get out of these situations, they're left feeling like a shell of a person. Or some people also describe it as feeling exhausted, or like they're 100 years old, or they don't even know who they are. Just empty, an empty shell. And it can be very difficult for them, and that can drive a person to suicide, because they feel like, I gave and I gave and I gave, and I thought that if I gave enough, I could actually earn this person's love or their loyalty or their respect, or any one of these things. But that didn't happen, and I gave and I gave and I gave and I gave until I had nothing left. And that can lead to just total emotional collapse within a person. And so having them, they're just a very fragile place. I mean, it's a terrifying place to be like, wow, I don't know who I am. The power in that, the kind of the upside to that, is realizing when you've been so ground down to where you feel like you're a blank slate, or that you're an empty shell of a person, kind of the upside to this is that then you can go forward and be like, okay, you know what? Now I can consciously go about choosing the kind of person that I want to be. Because maybe there was a lot about my old self that came from really outdated ideas from like my family, or maybe my religion, or my schooling, or my old career, or friends, or who knows. But now you can go about it consciously and choose which pieces you're going to move forward and pick up and reassemble yourself and reassemble your life with. But it's still difficult, don't get me wrong, but it can help if you can try to make this work for you as much as possible. Okay, let me scroll down. Connie asks, is there a list anywhere of counselors? Not that I am aware of. There's a few that I am very familiar with their work, but I'll tell you what, give me like a week or so to think about how to arrange something like this. If you're open to doing potentially like, I don't know, like telepsych kind of a thing, like Skype sessions, or there's different software that's like HIPAA protected, but that kind of thing. Let me see who I know, who I can comfortably say, I've seen their work. I know them. I've talked to them. I can vouch for them, because there are some therapists out there that are highly familiar with narcissistic abuse that I now know are highly problematic as well. And this is another thing this is my concern with people that are just doing individual therapy, is vulnerable people attract predators. Let me just go off track for a little bit, and let me talk about this, because this has been an issue. This little bug just wants his 15 seconds of fame. This was an ongoing issue in our support group, and frankly, probably every support group. So I think it's important that we just talk about this real quick. It's important that you guys have healthy boundaries wherever you go. And what happens is a lot of people, I have done this too, where they'll get into therapy, or they'll get into a support group, and they think, oh, good, I'm here, people get me. They feel this instant sense of comfort and trust that hasn't been earned. And they completely let their guard down. And then if that person's problematic, or if they come across problematic people, they start second guessing themselves. And they think, oh, well, this can't be happening because this person's a therapist, or this person is in a support group, or maybe it's just me, especially if a person's gone through a lot of psychological abuse and that gaslighting, where in that projection, where they really doubt their perception of events, they doubt their perception of reality, they doubt their judgment within themselves. So it's really, really important to realize that vulnerable people, it's kind of, they're vulnerable, and the odds are they don't even realize it. And so it's just go with your gut. Like, you guys know when something is off. Like, you know how something's off by how it feels. So go with that. And the discussion that I was having this morning at like 6:15 in my support group was, a gal was saying, and again, like, I get it because I've been there too. She was saying she was getting messages from a guy, and she said, I thought it was just me. I didn't want to be mean, and she didn't. She just thought, well, this guy's in a support group, and and he kept pushing boundaries, and she kept kind of reluctantly giving into it, and that's what they do, and they kind of lead people down their path of whatever they're intending to do. So it's really important. This is, again, like, why I'm a big fan of support groups, because that's less inclined to happen. So just go slow. Realize that trust is something that's earned regardless of this situation. And if something feels off, it's generally because it is, and it's totally okay for you to back up a little bit, whatever the situation is. If you're in therapy, or if you're in a support group, or you're at church, or you're with your family, or whoever you're with, to back up a little bit and try to examine, okay, I'm feeling confused. I'm feeling like something's problematic. I'm not okay with this. And to realize it's okay. It's okay for you to not be okay with something, and it's okay for you to take action based on what you feel that you need to do in order to become okay with something. So if that means not messaging a person back on Facebook, if that means blocking another member in a support group, if that means finding a different therapist, if that means asserting yourself and saying, hey, you know what, I'm really not okay with that, or I don't, and speaking up like that, any one of those things, any and all of those things are totally okay. This is about you guys reclaiming your power and control, and you finding your voice and all of this. So I hope that that's helpful. Shara says, the narcissist, my narcissist has been being nice lately. He's been cleaning rooms. Then he told me we need to start going to lunch once a week. Is this because he feels he is losing me? I have been distant lately. My guess is yes. That's what they do. But realize it's not that if he truly is narcissistic, it's not that he's losing you, it's that he's losing a source of supply. So that's how they keep people hooked in. It's the whole, I'll be really good to you, and then I'll get you kind of back in line with all of my great behavior, especially if it's over the top behavior. And then the next thing you know, down the road, that chair is kicked out from underneath you, and it's back to that problematic cycle again of finding out they're up to all kinds of things, or they're running really hot and cold, or, whatever it is that you normally encounter with them. So actions, nice actions are great. Anybody can be on good behavior for a certain period of time, but it's consistent actions over time that matter the most. Little Miss says, mine would have empathy for others, but not for the abuse he caused me. So, okay, this is a great comment. And one of the reasons for this is because it goes back to Patricia Evans and her analogy of the teddy bear, of what an abusive person thinks their partner should be like. So when a person starts acting human and starts showing signs of individuality, an abusive person has to justify them. It's the whole cognitive, it's how they resolve their cognitive dissonance. So if their thoughts don't match their actions, so if their action is going to be, I'm going to yell at my partner, then their thought has to be in alignment with that action. Okay, they can't have the attitude, the idea of yelling at my partner is wrong and then yell at somebody. So how they do that is they justify it. So if the action is, I'm going to yell at my partner, then the thought must be, my partner deserves to be yelled at. And so this is why abuse tends to get worse over time, not better, is because they're continuing to justify their behavior to themselves. And so in order for a person to be abusive to another person, they have to think, this person deserves it. And so then what happens, and again, it's that me versus you mindset. So over time, the partner, we become the enemy. And they start taking everything, they're getting triggered more and more by us. We can't do anything right. We're walking on eggshells nonstop, and it's because of that. And they oftentimes use their partner as their like emotional punching bag. And so, and this is how, to an extreme, abusive people can kill their partner and feel totally justified in doing so. There's no empathy, no remorse whatsoever, because in their mind, they deserved it. And that's what's so dangerous. When you're dealing with a person that has no empathy, they have no remorse, they feel totally justified in their mistreatment of others, that is a trifecta for a really, really problematic situation. And it doesn't necessarily have to escalate in a progressive, predictable pattern. They can go very quickly from being somewhat problematic to incredibly dangerous or deadly very quickly. I'm not trying to scare you guys. I'm just trying to let you know of the mindset that you're dealing with. So love doesn't hurt. Love doesn't abuse. Love doesn't run hot and cold. Love doesn't yell or hit or cheat or lie or do any of these things. And the reason that hurts so much isn't because it's love. It's because it's a lack of love. And a person can't give what they don't have. So if that narcissistic person has that empty bucket where they don't feel good about themselves, everything that they do is about their ego. So if they have some sort of deficit in that bucket where they just don't feel significant, if they don't know how to fill that bucket themselves, then they're operating at this deficit. So instead of a more normal mentality, which is win-win, teamwork, like let's work together. A narcissistic mentality is I have to destroy everyone else around me in order for me to be like the last one standing. But you see, like that mindset's not conducive to a relationship, because it's not an enemy situation. It should be a team situation. Okay, let me scroll down here. That's a great comment. Little Miss says, yes, saying sorry and continuing abuse is not empathy. Correct. Nor is it remorse. It's saying what you need to say in order to keep doing what you want to do. The Truth Hurts says, I just did a video today on backstabbers. I want to know if I'm right. When does the narcissist why does the narcissist intentionally hurt you when you were nothing but good to them? I just can't comprehend that. Why? Okay, so I think I just covered that before I read your question. But yeah, they work up in their mind that every problem, everything in their life is us, is their target's fault. And that they're when a person is so profoundly unhappy in themselves, they have a really hard time. It's next to impossible for them to see the good in others. Like there's just this void, this dark void that's within them, that no matter how much love and understanding and, patience or rehab or religion or therapy, what have you, it's not going to fill that up. Like that's something that they need to learn how to give to themselves in a healthy way. Unfortunately, how they give that to themselves is in a very destructive way. It's with tearing other people down. And that's what's so hard, because people don't change oftentimes unless they experience enough pain from their actions to actually drive them to change. But with a narcissistic person, if they don't have that insight to that there's a problem, because they're always getting their way, because if you really think about it, right? Like if you went through life and you're like everything was everybody else's fault, and you just tore everybody down in your mind, you're like, yeah, this is so obvious. Like this person's problematic and this person's problematic and this is everything that's wrong with them. And if you really worked up in your mind that you were right about that, it would be really hard for that person to realize, oh, what I'm doing isn't working. Because in their mind, it's everybody else. And so there's no acknowledgement of consequences or anything. It's deeply, I don't know, very kind of deeply disturbed, very deeply, what's the word I'm looking for? Kind of, their behavior is, I think, by and large, very subconscious, just kind of deeply unaware of what's going on. And a lot of, we all have different degrees of behavior, the things that we do that we're not aware of. And so there's kind of this whole evolution as far as change goes. Like there's these different stages of change. And so narcissistic people are often in the stage that's called pre-contemplative. So they're at that place where they're not aware that they have a problem. Like they haven't even begun to think about them possibly having a problem. It's kind of the same thing with like an addict or an alcoholic. Let's say that an alcoholic they have 7 DUIs and they drink, excessively 3 nights a week. But in their mind, until they realize that it's a problem, there's not any motivation to fix it. So they might be justifying it, thinking, oh, well, I really didn't have that many drinks, or it was because I hadn't eaten, or it was because, man, the cops are just really, they're out and about in this town, or man, they're really after me, or they're after me because I have a sports car, right? Or it's excuse after excuse after excuse. And so they're not at that place yet where they're realizing, oh, it's me. Like it's me, it's my drinking. And it takes a person hitting rock bottom. Like consequences have to get so severe. They might have to spend time in jail. They might have to lose their license. They might have to lose their children before they realize, okay, I get it now. This is a problem. And then they're actually motivated to change. With a person, when you're dealing with kind of that pathological personality, it's a lot harder to hit rock bottom when you're talking about personality traits, because that's easy to justify. It's not so cut and dry. It's not so cause and effect related. Drinking equals DUI. Like that's pretty, if this, then that kind of a thing. If that's not there, then it's really easy to justify a person's behavior to ourselves, and if they have a problematic behavior, it's easy for them to justify it to themselves. So it's hard. It's hard for them to wake up and really see that it's a problem. And then not only that, but to actually be highly motivated enough to change, because changing personality traits and the mindset that drives personality traits isn't like flipping a switch. And this has been their way of like perceiving and relating and interacting with the world for a very long time. And so, just kind of like for those of us on the opposite side of the spectrum, I think about my own stuff, how hard it's been for me. The struggle is still there. The struggle is real. Like developing boundaries. And the pain is really intense. If a person doesn't have healthy boundaries, if you're continue to be taken for granted and treated like a doormat and, all of these things, you're in a state of constant pain and resentment. But it's really hard to change, to say no, which is really wild because you would think that that would be easy. So to a person like with healthy boundaries, like my gosh, like, no, it's not hard saying no, like at all. It's so much easier just to say no or to set expectations than it is to continually say yes and just exhaust yourself. So I think if you can realize how difficult it is for us to get back in alignment with our inner child, or like with our highest and best self of what's healthy for us, then you can see too, the flip side of that for narcissistic people, it's the same thing. But we're experiencing so much pain from our actions where they're not. And so we have that instant feedback with, if we don't set that boundary, there's that instant feedback of pain. Like, oh, I just agreed to work. I agreed to stay late. Why did I do that? Or, oh man, I just agreed to, I don't know, go on a date with somebody that I don't really want to, or I, agreed to babysit, or, you know what I mean? Like, you keep saying yes when you really mean no. And it takes practice. Behavior change takes practice. It's not flipping a switch. And it's the practicing of that happens every moment of every single day. And so a lot of people talk about, what I call kind of getting more in alignment. So with us that tend to be overgivers, and if you think about us as overgivers and narcissistic people as overtakers, for us, a lot of people refer to that as codependency. We'll just leave that topic aside because that can be kind of a hot topic there, but or a very emotionally charged concept or word for people. And I'm by no means blaming anybody for anything that's happened, but so there's kind of this idea within codependency groups of this is a lifelong process because it's going back and peeling back the layers and examining, who am I? What do I really want? What do I really want to say yes to? Am I saying yes out of like fear, obligation, guilt, some sort of, deep need to people please or to like ingratiate myself? What is my survival mechanism here, and what is the truth? Like, what is my real desire to say yes, if that makes sense? So it's a long process. And so too, when people talk about their partner changing, I think it can be really helpful to realize this is not an overnight thing. Even if a narcissistic, just like a codependent person, right? Just like an overgiver, it's going to take years for them to get in alignment with themselves. Don't let that overwhelm you or depress you, because even slight changes can really radically change your life. But it's an exciting process. I'll tell you that too. Like, I am pretty much every single day, I'm like, oh man, that's so cool. Like, learning different things about myself. And I think if you find other people too that are getting better at examining their boundaries, they'll say the same thing. Like, oh man, I wish I would have learned this 20 years ago, but it's so cool now to learn this. But you realize, oh man, okay, the flip side of this, those other people, the overtakers, you really realize how much it is to ask of them that they would actually change, because the work involved is intense and it's ongoing. I hope that answered your question. Okay, hey, Peace Pom Pom's here. Okay, Tricia says, hey Dana, have you done the book club yet on the power of now? I'm halfway through this book and it has been life-changing in the best way possible. We have not done the live stream book club version of the power of now. I did do that book for book club. Sorry, that's weird. a handful of months ago. It's one of my absolute favorite books, and I agree. For me, it was also very, very life-changing, and I'm glad. I'm glad that it's been so eye-opening for you. I'd be curious to know, like, what aha moments you've had from it. I really feel like that book saved my life. Eckhart Tolle in general is just, he's so cute. Like, I just get the biggest kick out of him, and his laugh. I don't know if you've ever seen any of his YouTube videos. He's just so cute. He cracks himself up, and which I find hilarious. And his videos are really great. His message is really great. There's so much value and benefit to being in the moment and being in the now, and just really realizing that there's so much peace in letting, and just kind of putting the rope down. Like, if you find yourself at the end of the rope, like, just putting the rope down and just being in the moment, and just sitting there and realizing that we are not our emotions. You know, we're the watcher behind our emotions. To me, that was so incredibly powerful, because I just felt so intertwined with my emotion. It was such a highly emotional period in my life, and it was nice to be able to give myself that distance, and try to find my inner peace in that, to find my calm in that storm. So anyways, if you haven't watched any of Eckhart Tolle's videos, I highly recommend them. He's got a lot out there, and he's a very relaxing man to listen to. Okay. Little Miss says, I missed the Barbie microphone. Oh, I've got so many different microphones, and none of them seem to work. I don't know why. It's very frustrating. Very frustrating. Okay, good. Cecilia says it sounds good on her end. That's a good. I feel like it sounds, let me see, where is it? I feel like it sounds different when I'm live versus when people go back and watch these for some reason. So, weird. Ooh, I like that. Patania says, any of you raised by narcissistic parents that are also triggered by people saying, well, why do you let her get to you? I personally think this is like asking somebody, well, why do you let the poison make you sick? Yeah, it's very frustrating, because it's one of those things, it's like you can't win, right? So like, if you spend time around just toxic people, and then people say, oh, well, why do you let them get to you? And then if you are like, okay, you know what, you're right, like, I'm not going to spend time with them, and then you go no contact or super low contact, and then people are like, well, what are you doing? They're your parents, like, you need to go spend time with them. And you're like, I can't win. But let me expand on that, because the lesson in that is doing what you feel that you need to do in order to stay safe and sane, and not trying to please everybody else with that, because it's your life and it's not a democracy. Like, they don't get to vote, especially when they don't have to live with the consequences. So, and it's an incredibly insensitive and crazy making thing when somebody minimizes and invalidates like an abusive situation like that. And I guess for me, what gets me through that is it just chalking it up to, they don't get it. Like, they don't get it. A person just truly doesn't understand an abusive situation until they're in it. And even frankly then, even people that have sometimes been in abusive situations, if they have kind of their own unexamined codependency or kind of toxic messages, where they really hold this ideal of, oh, well, you need to forgive and forget, and you need to, but they're your parents, or, they have this toxic mindset of, well, this is what we do. Like, we just give and give and give, and we get better at learning how to walk on eggshells, and we get better at avoiding, tiptoeing around elephants in the room. And this is what family's all about, because blood is thicker than water, and this is, it's my mom, or, what have you, instead of actually setting healthy boundaries. And they chalk up their kind of poor boundaries as being compassionate, or like a good Christian or a religious person, like Muslim or Jewish person, or, Buddhist or what have you. And the reality is, it's just, no, this is just a deeply dysfunctional situation. Mahogany says, I would like to discard my narcissistic partner at his next visit to give myself closure. That's this week. He planned a trip for us Valentine's Day back in November. What do you think about this? I think that you need to do what you feel you need to do in order to keep yourself safe and sane. So, if that means not going on this Valentine's Day trip, if that means breaking up with him, if that means whatever that means, then I think that's what you need to do. I guess I just want to make sure that, because you're like, I want to discard him at his next visit. A lot of people can get sucked into playing this game, and they're like, I want him to hurt like I hurt, right? I want to give him a taste of his own medicine. Maybe I'm off base with that, but I would just encourage you, if you're going to end this relationship, that you're doing so because this is what's healthiest for you, not because you're trying to punish him. Because if that's the case, then it just creates all of that drama and that dysfunction, and it just keeps the game going. If you do go about breaking up with him, then realize, he's not going to like it. He's really not going to like it if it's right before Valentine's Day. So prepare yourself emotionally for that as much as you possibly can, and expect him to say all kinds of mean things, and to probably use a lot of obligation and guilt and charm and future faking and abuse, and kind of throwing out everything that he needs to throw out in order to either grind you down or to try to suck you back in. Yeah, Diane says, I think Donald Trump is giving narcissistic abuse the world stage for everyone to educate themselves about this. Yeah, I agree. All we can do is try to use whatever comes downstream for our highest and greatest good. The upside to Donald Trump being a president, and again, this is politics aside. Like I'm not knocking Republicans. I'm just talking about his some of his problematic personality traits. The upside to this is it is bringing a lot of this a lot more into mainstream, and there's a lot more discussion about this. So this is good, because hopefully we can reach a lot more people and be able to kind of give them these aha moments, because I think a lot of people struggle with this and they don't even realize it. So, all we can do is try to squeeze as much good out of this as possible. Lori says, how is it that Donald Trump could have such good children? None of them are on drugs or drinking if he's a narcissist. Narcissists raise troubled and damaged children. Well, for starters, he's a workaholic, so he's not there. My guess is these children were by and large raised by their mothers and probably nannies. I don't know how much of an involved father he is, and I think narcissists, they tend to have golden children, and then they tend to have scapegoats. So the golden child has generally a fantastic experience with a narcissistic parent. Granted, they're not allowed to really be themselves, but they become the mirror image of their father. And they're often showered with, you know, praise and criticism to get them in a line, right? Like, you're going to be what I want you to be. That's kind of that narcissistic parent quality there. So and plus, we don't really know. We don't really know how well adjusted his children are. All we can see is from the outside looking in, and they're used to being in this, you know, center of attention and kind of what have you. I think it's maybe more telling to look at his wives and his ex-wives to see the kind of behavior he really does have. Darth Eric asks, how come I still doubt if my mother is a narcissist, even though some people have told me that they think the things that she said are awful and I should cut contact. My family was my life. I'm heartbroken. It's one of those things, like, hope dies last. And it's really hard there's a couple things here. It's really hard for a person to come to terms with the fact that their parent has really problematic behavior. And to give up hope that they're ever going to change. Like, that's just really difficult. The second part of that is when you're talking about a person's behavior in terms of like a diagnosis, right? Like a personality disorder. A lot of people view that in terms of more like black or white thinking, like either this person's a narcissist or they're not. And the reality is narcissism's on a spectrum. So a person doesn't have to be, it's on a spectrum. And it's an art, it's not a science as far as diagnosing things. It's not like cancer where the doctor might, look at the white blood cell count and be like, okay, you know what, this is off and here are some other signs. And these signs, together paint the picture of XYZ, right? Personality disorder stuff is very different. So yeah, there's certain character traits, but it's whatever that clinician is seeing at that moment in time. And a lot of people can present really well in therapy. And so that clinician might not see that it's problematic, or they might be filtering what they're seeing through their own biases, or the clinician themselves could have a personality disorder. I mean, there's like any number. That's the challenge with this, because you can go to a dozen different clinicians and potentially get a dozen different answers as to whether or not a person actually has a personality disorder. So it's not an exact science by any stretch. So I think it's more helpful to look at narcissism on the spectrum that it actually exists on. So there's that range of narcissistic behavior. Where a person is on that range really doesn't matter a whole lot. What matters is their behavior problematically narcissistic? Are they entitled? Do they lack empathy? Do they lack remorse? Are they abusive? Are they, very self-absorbed? Is it all about them? Is it, all of these things combined? Like any one of those things is highly problematic. So I would encourage you to think, it's interesting too, to think about, because we all sit on this spectrum. And if you think about the spectrum kind of ranging from like a plus 10 on one side to like 0 to a minus 10 on the other side. So if you think about it from like terms of like self-orientation. So we sit in the middle, right? In theory. Way over to one side, to that positive 10 side, is a person if they're over giving. To the minus 10 side, it would be if a person's overtaking. We all sit on the spectrum and thinking about, okay, where do we fit in? Like where do you fit in? Where do any siblings fit in? Where do different family members fit in? I think that's a lot more telling than thinking about things in such rigid terms of either this person has a personality disorder or they don't. So, and then also too, on that spectrum, I think this can be very helpful too, because the word, we're talking about narcissism in terms of like narcissistic abuse. And so there's this very negative connotation with the word narcissism. there's a concept out there called healthy narcissism. And so on that spectrum, if a person's just, sitting at 0, kind of slightly to that taking side, there's kind of this range, like this range of what's considered healthy. Either way you go can be incredibly problematic. So if a person's more on that healthy side of narcissism, where they have the mindset of, yeah, why not me? Why not now? And they set goals and they're motivated and they have a team attitude, and it's very much like, yeah, you know what? I can win, but there's enough to go around and you can win too. That's healthy narcissism. Unhealthy narcissism is that me versus you mentality. It's that mentality of there can be only one. Like I'm gonna win and you're gonna lose, and it's very competitive, especially and it's problematic when things aren't needing to be competitive, like in a relationship or a parent-child dynamic, or even with friendships or possibly coworkers, that kind of thing, where that person's overtaking and this other person's, overgiving, because for whatever reason. So I think that can maybe help to think about things that way. It takes the pressure off of having to assign such a definite label to her behavior and just viewing it as more of a spectrum. I hope. Maybe that, I don't know, I hope that helps. Okay, oh gosh. Lori says, you saved me from a very bad therapist. He said he loves reading about cults and Satan and carried the Bible and told me narcissistic abuse isn't in the DSM and completely invalidated everything about it. Oh, that guy sounds delightful. Jeez. Yeah, good choice to not go to somebody like that. And that's the problem, is a lot, and I get it, right? Like, it makes sense. Like, if the DSM is kind of the handbook for mental health, if that's the book that they work out of, for a lot of mental health clinicians, they take, some of them do, a lot of them do. They'll take that word, the DSM, as like gospel truth. The DSM was never meant to be used to diagnose anybody. And it was never meant, it was only really meant to just categorize different types of behavior. So from clinician to clinician, it could say, hey, you know what? Heads up, this is what you're looking at. So it was kind of a snapshot of, so people knew, like, okay, you're saying antisocial personality disorder. So then if you get a new patient, okay, I know exactly what I'm dealing with. Like, this person's highly exploitative, they manipulate others, they tend to be pathological liars, they probably have a criminal history, they might have a history of violence and aggression. Kind of this cluster of personality traits that you're looking at. The problem is the DSM is ever changing, and terms get shuffled around all the time. Different personalities get reclassified. It's people give it way too much authority and power than it was ever intended to have. So I personally find that really problematic because, it wasn't that long ago that people were put in mental institutions and they were locked up and they had no power. They were held against their will because it was like, oh, well, you had this homosexuality. It was this idea of, well, homosexuality is in the DSM, so therefore you are mentally ill. I can only imagine what gay and lesbian people must have gone through 20 years ago or 30 years ago with all of this. Can you imagine? Like the gaslighting and talk about being ground down and redefined and being told like, no, okay, yes, you're interested in same-sex people. This is pathological personality stuff. It has to do probably with your childhood and how you were raised. And so we really need to work towards fixing you because you're broken. Like the damage that would be done to a person and to their sense of identity and self-esteem and everything else is just, it's profound. So this is one of the many reasons it's just meant to be used to describe, from clinician to clinician, like, hey, this is the kind of behavior that we're looking at. The third edition of the DSM even says that in the beginning. It says, like, this is not meant to be used for like diagnosing. It's not meant to be used as such a definitive work. It's meant to be used as pointers to behavior for that reason. So people weren't being like, oh, well, now it's in the DSM, because the DSM, I think it's only kind of moderated and edited by, I think there's like a panel of 20 psychologists and psychiatrists. That's not a lot. And so, you know, if any of them have some sort of agenda, like, you know, I don't know, it's a slippery slope into some weird, like, Orwellian kind of dystopia type society, when you've got people that are saying, well, according to this book, you're mentally ill, so therefore you need to get on medication or get shock therapy or get locked up in an institution or shipped off to an island, or, you know. So I think it's important for us to look at, to really just back things up and look at behavior. But yes, long story short, yes, a lot of clinicians, because narcissistic abuse, it's not in the DSM, and neither is CPTSD. And so these are more unofficial terms that really, frankly, they should be in there. They should be the primary ones in there, because personally, I think every other disorder in there is largely and incredibly impacted by trauma. And trauma comes from narcissism. It's weird that narcissism is not given more weight than it is. Like, it's the problem. So, and I mean, that's my opinion, but I just saying. But yeah, you shouldn't have to, you definitely don't want to feel invalidated by whoever you're trying to see for therapy. That's not cool. Oh my gosh, Michaela says, I just joined the live video now. I found a great deal of therapists who don't seem to want to listen if you say you were in an abusive relationship. I've been met with, well, how do you know that? LOL. Jeez Louise. That's disgusting to me. And yeah, I would agree. There's a lot out there that are really, really not familiar with abusive relationships at all. The stuff I have heard, like, like, it makes my blood boil, because so many people think of abusive relationships in terms of physical abuse, like major physical abuse, like broken bones or black eyes, very visible physical abuse. And like, some of the stupid stuff I heard a comment, I don't know, it was a few weeks ago, where somebody had said, they were talking about some, I probably shouldn't even say too much. I don't know how much like HIPAA stuff is there, but let me see if I can make it vague. In terms of a person having this domestic violence situation, and they were saying, oh, well, this person there was no mention of domestic violence in like this last session that they had. And I just kept thinking, like, oh, well, I guess it's all better now. Like, a person like doesn't have to be hit on like a regular basis in order for it to be abusive. Like, physical abuse is a late stage of abuse, and it's power and control. That's the problem. It's not a communication issue. It's not an anger issue. It's a power and control issue. And it's their mindset, and it comes out in 7 different ways, physical abuse being one of them. To me, I strongly believe that psychological abuse is the primary problem that with abuse. That's how people get sucked in and stay in cults and abusive relationships, and how they follow dictators like Hitler, and how they get involved in like all kinds of situations, because it's when you control a person's mind, you control them. It's the ultimate form of control. And it's not about physical. I mean, don't get me wrong, like, I'm not minimizing the physical abuse, but it's just like, people don't stay in abusive relationships generally because they're afraid for their physical safety. they're generally staying because they either think it's their fault, or they're staying because they think this person can change, or, those are probably the main two. And then financial reasons. And maybe guilt and obligation would be some of the other ones. It's frustrating. So yeah, you definitely don't want to feel challenged or that you have to prove yourself to a therapist. That's a problem. Yes, I agree completely, Lucy. Well said. She says a good therapist can tell from you and your symptoms if you have been abused by a cluster B personality. Yes, completely. I have a coworker of mine who's a therapist who I really respect, and we were talking about narcissism. Oh, this was a while ago, and he says, yeah, you can always tell when you're dealing with like a cluster B, because mainly a narcissist, because their victim is a total mess and they're totally cool, calm, and collected. And he had total insight into that. I've also come across many therapists that don't have that level of insight, and they treat everything as a communication issue, and that everything is workable, and it's not. And that's really re-victimizing to people if you've got a therapist who can't tell the difference between an abusive relationship and like a regular relationship that's having problems. Okay, Katie was saying, where do you find support groups? I don't know how to find a group about emotional abuse. Do you mean online or in person? I don't even know where I'd go to look for in-person groups. I would, sorry, I was reading another comment. I'm not laughing at your comment. There's all kinds of online support groups. I'm kind of a bigger fan of online support groups, and I'll tell you why. First, they run 24/7. And second, you have that, the kind of the safety of anonymity because they're online. So I have two different, just for an example, I have two different support groups. I have one on Facebook and then I have one on my website. The reason I have two of them is because for privacy reasons. So like the one on my website, anybody can choose their screen name, and I don't know who they are. I don't know if they're male or if they're female or their age or anything about them. And they can they can choose their name and they can put up a picture. So there's that level of privacy. And that's however, that's an open group. So like if you go to my website, you can see what I'm talking about. My website's thriveafterabuse.com. And then if you go to support group, you can see what that group looks like. Then there's a lot of groups on Facebook. The pros and cons to this are groups on Facebook. There's a lot of them. People are already on Facebook anyhow. The downside is, unless you create a fake account, it's linked to your personal profile. So if you're concerned at all about other people knowing that you're in a group like this, it can be really problematic. But if you create a fake profile, or if you're not concerned about this, then, it can be more of like a non-issue. But I prefer online groups. My concern with in-person groups, there's a couple concerns I have with this. My safety is probably the primary one. So because you've got in this support, you have a support group of people that are meeting in person, all of which have abusive ex-partners. All of these abusive ex-partners view other people that are coming between them and their target as the enemy. So it can be potentially very dangerous to be in that kind of situation. Not to mention, like I talked about earlier, support groups especially can be kind of prime hunting ground for predatorial people. So it's not uncommon you've got people that are predatorial to get into support groups online or in person and pretend they have a whole sad story. They pretend to be a victim, but really they're there to look for a partner. And you can generally tell. I mean, they'll start, messaging you right away, or they want to meet you, or they want to, manipulative people tend to come on fast and furious. And regardless, support group is, not a good idea to date people that are in the same support group, just in general, because then if that bridge, if that doesn't work out, then it's like then you really don't have any support. So not a fan of people really meeting up in person, especially because people tend to have their guard down. They're like, oh, I'm so glad that we've met. And if you've got that predatorial person who's pushing boundaries and they're like, oh, you know what? That meeting's on the other end of town. I'll just come pick you up. Like, where do you live? Or, hey, can you give me a ride home? Like, my car won't start. Or it can just go south in any number of ways. And so many people, especially like if you're only like a year or two out of these types of relationships, odds are a person's still incredibly vulnerable and they don't even realize it. And not only that, but these people are master manipulators. And so I get really concerned when I hear about people that are wanting to meet up. You really got to err on the side of caution and have a healthy level of skepticism and safety when meeting people in general, but especially people that are potentially going to, a support group. So just saying. Somebody had asked earlier about, have they ever heard of a narcissist saying that they were kidnapped? No, that's a first. I have not heard that before. It doesn't surprise me. I feel like I've heard a lot of other excuses. I've heard that they had cancer, that they had lupus, that they had to go out of town to like Africa suddenly. I've heard that they have, lies, like you name it, that they're suicidal, that they're going to get into rehab or therapy, or that they are in rehab or therapy, and that their therapist thinks they're doing great, but in reality, they're not even in therapy, or that they're in AA and they're so happy now because they finally become a sponsor. And then the reality is they haven't even been in AA and they haven't been a sponsor, or that they've saved up a lot of money and they can't wait to buy a house for their new partner, even sending pictures of things like pictures of money or pictures of a new car, stuff like that. And it's like none of it's even true. So when you're dealing with a pathological liar, it's generally a good idea to assume that they are a pathological liar, that they lie, that they lie. Like if they're talking, they're lying. So it's a mistake to ever trust a person that has a pattern of lying. It's because there's more that's going on there than them lying. It's the mindset that's driving that. So, why a person why they feel the need to be such a compulsive liar. That's the problem. And that's why it's so difficult to get to the bottom of things and for them to actually get help. Let's see. Darth Eric says, thank you, Jesse, and her screen name is The Crazy Angry Codependent. I am trying to stop the cognitive dissonance, but I am just heartbroken. My chest is literally in pain. Yeah, I'm so sorry that you're going through this, and that's so common when a person, it's so hard to accept the situation for what it is and to accept the person for who they are. And let me elaborate on that a little bit. So when I say accepting a person for who they are, it doesn't mean that you're okay with it. It just means that you're releasing the need that they're going to change. You just realize, okay, this is just who this person is for whatever reason. This is just who they are. And I'm going to quit being in such resistance to that, because being in resistance to what is and to what somebody else is, it'll wear a person out. And so if you just accept, you're like, okay, this is just how they are. And so knowing this is just how they are, then that's when we can get our power back. And we're like, okay, now I can actually respond to this. I can actually have a plan of action to figuring out what I need to do in order to keep myself safe and sane, and then respond accordingly, versus being in resistance to who they are and then not having a plan and thinking that maybe this time they're going to be different, being continually let down, and then being in reaction. Bob says, and real quick too, in Darth Eric, getting into support groups for children of narcissistic parents can also be incredibly supportive. Like, it can be very validating. It can give a lot of clarity. It can give a lot of support to going through this, because it's a lot. So something to think about. Bob says, does anyone else out there feel like they are surrounded by narcissists? I feel like everyone in my life is a narcissist. I think that's also very common, because for a couple of reasons. For starters, you're now aware of this. Like, you've become aware of, like, oh, like, we're not all the same. And, there's people with really problematic personalities out there. And, there's kind of this name for it. And this is really what's going on. And so when we start examining, we start seeing things clearly, and not through the lens of kind of, what Sam Vaknin calls like our malignant optimism, like where we quit projecting all of our good qualities onto them, and we actually start seeing people clearly for their behavior, for what their behavior is. It's very eye-opening, and it's terrifying. And so a lot of people struggle with that, exactly what you're saying. They start looking around and they're like, okay, can this really be what I'm seeing? Like, is nobody, generally, if you're not in a support group and, it's just you, and you're like, oh my gosh, I feel like my eyes have been opened. It's sort of like feeling like you've been given some sort of, superpower that you can see vampires or something. And you're like, oh my gosh, there's a lot of them out there. Nobody else can see them. I feel like I must be crazy. I must be wrong, right? Like, I'm reading way too much into this, and it can really be anxiety inducing for a person for quite a while. But the reality is your eyes are just more open to it. And again, people are on that spectrum. And so when you start thinking about their behavior in terms of being on that spectrum, I think that can kind of help a little bit too, because again, people get really hung up on thinking in terms of like black or white, like either they are a narcissist, like narcissistic personality disorder type narcissist, or they're normal. And it's not so black and white. It's like on that spectrum. But and there's an adjustment period. Like, it's very much like this awakening, and it's terrifying, but at the same time, and I don't know, I guess because I feel like I'm more on the other side of this now. For me, I get so excited when I hear this from people. That might sound really sadistic. I don't mean that in that way at all. But it's exciting because it tells me that their eyes are really open to things. And I will tell you, it's like pulling a thread on a sweater. So now that you're awake to this, it's sort of like, oh my gosh, things start making sense. And at first you might feel really hyper vigilant. Like, I just do, like, there's a ton of them out there and I just want to stay in my house. Yeah, but over time, if you start realizing, okay, yeah, there's a lot of them out there, you start getting more in tune with, like, once you know what problematic behavior is and how it feels, and then you start getting more in tune with yourself and more in tune with kind of your wants and your needs, and you start getting more in alignment. Like, this is all of this, like all of this pain, all of this, the struggle, the hypervigilance, all of these are like signs of waking up. And the cool thing is kind of at the end of this journey that nobody really wants to take is the gift is you. Like you get to really discover, probably for the first time, who you really are. And that's what people mean when they talk about kind of healing their inner child or finding their inner child, is you really get more in tune with yourself. Because so it's, even if a person doesn't have a narcissistic parent growing up and they were actually able to, develop kind of their own personality, and they were given this amazing, let's just say they were, hypothetically speaking, given this like the perfect environment in which to grow, like society, religion, culture, school, your friends, other people will tend to grind a person down over time, and a person becomes kind of a product of their environment. And it's when we get to these types of majorly painful situations where we're in many ways very broken down, that we realize, okay, now we can actually start to rebuild, but we can go about this in like a very methodical way where we're examining the pieces that we're wanting to rebuild our lives with. And so it can just be just tremendous amounts of personal growth can come from this. It can, the likes of which I don't know if a person can get it any other way. So, but yes, you're in that stage of kind of like the I see dead people. Like I just I see them everywhere, and it's terrifying, but it's not you. It's normal. It's all part of it. So hang in there and try to kind of like replace that anxiety and fear and overwhelm with curiosity, because that's when things get really interesting. So if you can replace it with curiosity, and you're like, why am I feeling this way? And, how am I feeling and why? And what kind of behavior are they showing that's kind of giving me cause for concern? And then kind of following that rabbit hole and just exploring that. And it's just so interesting. Like, it's just all so interesting. Okay. Let's see. Oh, hey, Lori's here. Hi, Lori. Okay, go scrolling down. Donna says, Dana, I look forward to your live streams every week. I appreciate your work so much. Well, you are so very welcome. And I was just talking to another admin in my support group tonight, and we're talking about the benefit of the power of community was part of our topic. And while I'm humbled and honored that my videos have helped so much, I really, really, really believe it's the synergy of the community, because I feel like everybody brings a different piece of the puzzle together. And so it's just amazing how people are like, oh, you know what? And everybody thinks they're alone. Like, that's kind of the kicker, right? Everybody thinks that they're so alone in their experience, and then they realize that they're not. And so everybody has their own pieces. And then when people start getting together, like you guys are doing in the chat and the live stream, and then, joining multiple support groups and stuff, and talk and hearing, even if you don't actively participate, even just hearing other people's experiences, it's just the aha moments are never ending. And I remember when I first got into a support group, just being so blown away, thinking, oh my gosh, you experienced that too? Or I thought that, like, that's so weird. Like, I thought it was just me. And then being very overwhelmed. I'm like, this stuff is like major undeniable patterns of behavior. Like, this was not unique to my situation. Like, this is the thing, and it happens on a really regular basis. And yeah, it's an epidemic, really. So yeah, it's very powerful. It's very powerful to get the clarity and the insights from other people that have really gone through this. Bob says, thanks for the validation, guys. What a sick world we live in. And Mr. Tahiti, that's an awesome name, says, that's why there's healers like us, Bob. We're the antibodies that will tell the rest of the body about the viral infection. That is well said, yeah. You know, I think in many ways, and I've talked about this before, and this sounds maybe really hippie woo-woo, and I really would like to do like a full video on this, because I have like flow charts. I have like diagrams of mapping this out. But I really feel that understanding all of this and kind of what we're going through as a society, like I was just saying, like this level of like narcissistic abuse, it's really an epidemic, and we're on kind of this wave, this first wave of awareness. It's sort of like back in, what would that be? Like the 60s or 70s, when researchers began to study the concept of codependency and how that term grew and expanded as understandings grew and expanded, and say it's the same thing. So now we're kind of going back to the opposite of that, and now it's, you know, more of like narcissism and narcissistic abuse, and now that understanding is morphing and evolving and expanding, it's growing even more. But now we have the power of the internet. So whereas before people might have only been able to go to, you know, one-on-one sessions, or they might have been able to go to a group session with like 8 other people, getting into a group where there's 16,000 people, which is the size of my online support group right now, or one of my groups right now, when it's that large, like the aha moments are nonstop. So it's like powerful stuff. So it's really kind of speeding up this evolution of understanding, and I think healing as well. So I really believe that a lot of what we're going through right now with this whole, because really it's emotional awareness. So like emotional abuse tends to lead to emotional awareness. That's kind of the upside to this. Like we have the potential and the possibility to become more in alignment with our authentic self. And I really feel like that it's the next stage of human evolution, is emotional intelligence. I know that might sound really far out there, but I think that's what's going on. So Truth Seekers talking about doing EMDR. She said that the counseling, not so much, but the EMDR was great. I would be so curious, for those of you guys that have done EMDR, kind of what was your experience with it, and why? Like, why do you think it was so helpful, and what did you notice, and then how soon after your session did you start noticing this? Like, was it right away, or was it like the next day, or kind of what was your experience? Recovering Soul says, I'm so lost. I had court last week and they changed my name and never let me even see the document before the judge signed it. I can't eat or get out of bed. Oh, I'm really sorry to hear that. That's intense. You know, I would encourage you to do, to think, what do you need right now? Like, how can you be good to yourself right now in all of this? Elizabeth is talking about EMDR and says, the fear of pain is not the actual damage, it's the memory of the incident. So I read, perhaps it's a reassociation of the memory. I think there's a couple different books that I've read recently having to do with trauma and how the body processes trauma. One of those books, it's the how the body keeps the score. And there's another book called Tapping the Healer Within. And that one's more about like the EFT therapy, although it's called a different name. And I think it might have been the Tapping the Healer Within book that I'm thinking of, where he talks about how it's like the memory of the incident. And if it's the right book that I'm thinking of, he talks a little bit about this. So like when a person goes through a traumatic event, it's like this flash bulb that goes off in their brain. And all kinds of like adrenaline is released, and it's that event, and then the memory of that event is like captured in the body. And unless that emotion and that memory is fully processed, it like stays in the body. It's very strange. And he talks about this. The guy who wrote Tapping the Healer Within, I believe he was a psychiatrist for a long time. And he found that this tapping therapy he was able to create tremendous shifts in people and within very few visits. And I guess he went on the radio and did this on TV for many years, and it would ask other psychiatrists, like, give me your toughest patients that have gone through the most extensive trauma, and let me see what I can do with them within 10 minutes. And was able to have, he claims he was able to have really massive results with it. So I've heard similar stuff. I have a friend of mine her main thing is EFT, tapping therapy. She swears by it, and she works with a lot of traumatized people and reports the same. So, I don't know. It's I would be curious to learn more about it. But in that book, the Tapping the Healer Within, he talks about kind of the energy meridians and different tests that had been done on people with like injecting them with some sort of, a colored dye that they could track the movement. And they were able to actually see that in certain parts of the body that the dye didn't move. But then after this tapping therapy, that the dye did actually start flowing how it was supposed to flow through the body. I don't know. Interesting. Shamira asks, why do narcissists hate even though you've done nothing wrong, and call them out on their nonsense? My ex became abusive towards the end of the relationship, and he went around spreading rumors. For a couple reasons. So whenever a narcissistic person is confronted or challenged in a way that's either real or perceived, we talked about that earlier, like that's a whole other level of like crazy making, because like you don't even know what they're perceiving. But if you actually challenge them and you're like, hey, you know what, you're doing X, Y, and Z, that can cause a narcissistic injury. And so they become really defensive because their ego, their sense of self, you're not dealing with a person that has a healthy, well-developed sense of self. And so they have this paper-thin ego. And when they feel attacked, they lash out, and it's that fight reflex, that fight defense. They lash out. And so that's part of it, because a narcissistic injury results in narcissistic rage, and that can lead to all kinds of things, like you were saying, hate, violence, and the aggression, smear campaign, all of that. Also, in part, is when a person knows they've done something wrong, if they're deeply in denial about it, if it's causing them cognitive dissonance. So if their actions, if their thoughts don't, so if they're holding two conflicting thoughts at the same time about the same thing, and those thoughts are basically in conflict with their action, like our thoughts and actions have to always line up. So if he became, whatever he did, or whatever abuse he went through, if his action was to cheat on you, let's just say, if his action was to cheat on you, he's going to have to justify his action. So how this is normally done when a person has problematic behavior is with a problematic justification. So in order for a person to justify cheating on their spouse, they might say, oh, well, we weren't having enough sex, or she was always nagging, or like, or this other woman threw herself at me, or, it's always an excuse. And that's why, because they have to, any person, any of us, everybody experiences cognitive dissonance probably on a fairly regular basis. If we human beings, we need our thoughts to always be in alignment with our actions. So like I had just mentioned, so when you have a person that has problematic behavior, they're going to have to come up with some sort of justification for that. And narcissistic people are great at doing that because they tend to have a lot of problematic behavior. And once a person justifies something to themselves, it's a lot easier for them to continue justifying it. And so this can kind of snowball into, or if they tell themselves, well, yeah, I cheated on her because, we weren't intimate often. We didn't have enough sex. And then if they cheat on again, or if they, let's just say they yell, oh, well, she knew I had a stressful day at work. She shouldn't have asked me about dinner. And then the next time it's, oh, well, yeah, okay, I yelled at her, but it was because of this. Or I abused her because, she should know better. She shouldn't have asked me about that, or kind of what have you. But their justifications don't make sense. And I think on some level, they realize they don't make sense. And that's why they're so defensive about their justifications. Because it would almost, I think, cause kind of like this emotional collapse if they were to actually fully realize, to fully be accountable for their bad behavior. Because most people, by and large, tend to go through life, we're all the hero of our own story, right? So we all tend to think that we have good behavior. And so for people that have bad behavior, if that makes them uncomfortable, they have to convince themselves that they're a good person. And so for them to convince themselves that they're a good person, they have to make the other person that they're harming the problem. And so that's where you see a lot of the stuff where they're projecting a lot of their garbage onto their target. So they might be cheating on you, but then they're accusing you of cheating on them. They might be siphoning funds, and then they accuse you of opening up credit cards or what have you, that they don't know about. Like, you're dealing with people with very deeply dysfunctional and disturbed thought processes. And I think, too, a large part of that smear campaign, like you're experiencing, is in part, it's to convince themselves that, in fact, they are not the problem. It's just deeply dysfunctional behavior, deeply pathological dysfunctional behavior. Interesting. Gina is talking about EMDR and says, it's amazing how even one session can make such a difference. When I left, my anxiety was totally gone, and that particular memory we went through now is not nearly as traumatizing. Interesting. Okay, let me scroll down here and get caught up with the chat. Oh, I think, oh, nope, there. Oh, wow, I'm way behind. Okay. Oh, Heather. Heather says, Dana, what makes someone good supply? I'm just curious as to why he targeted me. It makes me feel like such a moron for falling for his trap and for believing that I could be so lovable. I can totally relate to feeling that way. What makes a person good supply is depending on whatever a narcissistic person needs or wants at the time. So whether it's money or sex or food or clothing or shelter or transportation or a job promotion or a job or social status or public image or you name it. It's hard to tell because it's whatever is going on inside of their mind. But you're not a moron for falling for his trap. And my guess is, I could tell you from this last part of what you said, you feel like a moron for believing that you could be so lovable. My guess, the vulnerability that he exploited within you is that you weren't feeling lovable. And so when a narcissist comes into our life and stays for any length of time, they target supply, and in order to get supply, they exploit vulnerabilities. And we all have vulnerabilities because we're all human. And our vulnerabilities are going to change as we go through life. So a person's vulnerabilities when they're 20 probably going to be very different from when they're 40 or when they're 60 or when they're 90. So it's good for us to be aware of what our existing vulnerabilities are. So these vulnerabilities, they could have started in childhood or they could be recent. So for example, if a person grows up feeling unloved or unimportant as a child, then that's going to be what I call like their empty bucket. So they're going to be walking around feeling that way. And that's going to make them very prone and primed for a highly problematic person, an emotional manipulator, to come in with that love bombing to make them feel very loved and very important. And so they're going to most likely drink that up and interpret that kind of behavior as, oh, this is so amazing. This is so healthy. This person's my perfect partner. I feel like they're my soulmate. Whereas to a person that has their buckets filled would normally interpret this behavior as, this is really problematic. This is a major red flag. I need to get out of here. But it's next to impossible for people to see situations clearly when we have a vulnerability. It's sort of like if a person hasn't eaten in 3 days, odds are they're not going to be thinking clearly and make good decisions about what they're eating when they're starved out. Like they're probably just going to eat whatever seems like the best option at that time. It works the same with narcissists. This is how people get caught up with like online dating scams and in cults. So like with online dating scams, they're targeting people for supply for money, right? And in order to do that, they're exploiting their vulnerability. So they're going after people that they think might be more vulnerable. So maybe people that are older, people, but really anybody's fair game now for like online dating scams. But I think they tend to go after people that they think are more vulnerable. And then they shower them with love bombing. And when all is said and done, then the person kind of snaps out of that fog and they're like, oh my gosh, my bank account's been drained. What have I done? I'm so stupid. They're not stupid at all. They're human and they have emotional needs that have been unmet for a long period of time. So maybe that person had those empty buckets of feeling unloved and unimportant as a child, and that's what made them prime pickings for an emotional manipulator. Or maybe they had this amazing childhood and it wasn't until later on in life that their spouse died or that they got divorced or they never married, and all of a sudden they're incredibly lonely, and now they're, 50 or 60 years old, and this prince or princess charming comes along and tells them everything that they want to hear. So even though they had this great childhood, they're now at this later stage in life feeling very lonely, very unloved, very unimportant, right? And so that's what's making them prime for that love bombing. Every emotional manipulator tends to go about things, they change up the game. They're emotional con artists. that's how they get through life. So like a normal, decent person doesn't see them coming. It's not until they get tangled up with them, in hindsight being what it is, that they can look back and say, oh, what was I thinking? Like, this is so obvious. Of course, this person is these were the red flags. The reason hindsight's 2020 is because it gives us emotional distance from the situation. So we're thinking clearly. It's really hard to think clearly when we're up to our eyeballs in emotions, especially emotions that we've been starved out to get for so long. So it's not you, it's them. And once you can kind of realize, like kind of trace back, okay, these are my vulnerabilities, this is how they were able to exploit me, then you can work towards, okay, this is an empty bucket that I need to work on filling, and ideally not filling it with another partner, but instead focusing on filling it through hobbies, through friends, through pets, through making sure that you're seeing things clearly before you hop back into dating. Because what tends to happen is when people date, sorry, my hair is bothering me. When people tend to get tangled up with an emotional manipulator, they oftentimes, I think, tend to think it's a fluke. And they're like, okay, the problem is this person. Like, this person is the problem. And they're half right about that. However, until they can realize, because these people are out there, okay, there's lots of them out there, until they can identify what are my vulnerabilities, how are they able to exploit me, until they address those vulnerabilities, they're going to keep falling for it. And what oftentimes happens is, in an attempt to stay safe, so if a person, let's say they get tangled up with a real like Prince or Princess Charming kind of character, they get really burned by that. What people often do is they stay away from what causes pain. So they might link up, oh, this charming person is problematic, I'm going to stay away from them. And they might go, the next partner might be more of a jerk. Because in their mind, a lot of this is subconscious, and in their mind they might be thinking, well, the snake in the grass bit me, but at least with this person, they're a snake, and I know what I'm dealing with. And then vice versa. So then if a person has a relationship with more of that overt narcissist, the obvious snake, they might think, well, I know the warning signs, I'm never going to fall for that again. And then what happens is they tend to get tangled up with the Prince Charming or Princess Charming kind of narcissistic person, because it's the exact opposite. Because again, it feels so healthy because they're so emotionally depleted from that previous relationship. So I think a good way to test where, because again, it's hard for a person to see straight if you've got these vulnerabilities. A good way to test to see if you've got your buckets filled is to go out and make some friends and to spend some time around other people and to see, okay, what kind of friends am I attracting? Like who am I allowing to stay in my life? Because what happens is our external environment is a really good reflection of our internal environment. So if we continue to find ourselves with a lot of problematic people in our life, then odds are that's a sign that we're still out of alignment. And unfortunately for a lot of people, if a person grows up in a home that's deeply dysfunctional, which the vast majority of people do, they start out of alignment and they don't even realize it because that's been their normal. It's sort of like the last thing the fish notices is the water. So a person might be going through life and not linking up what's wrong, like they might not be linking up correct cause and effect. And a lot of this comes back to like our old initial programming as children. And so later on in life as adults, if we're getting in more and more problematic relationships and okay, what on earth is going on here? Am I a magnet for these people? How do I stay safe? How do I keep these people out of my life? Why do I keep attracting them? And a lot of it's these unaddressed vulnerabilities that this stuff's not taught, right? Like, so people don't realize, oh, like I didn't realize I had this vulnerability. I thought this was just normal because this is just how I just grew up neglected. right? Or I grew up in and out of foster homes, or I grew up moving all the time. And so anything that causes, and really it's a person's perception of their childhood. It's not necessarily the events themselves. It's more of how the child perceives it. So a child doesn't have to go through anything even super intense. Even just having a parent who is potentially working all the time and isn't able to be there to give a child emotional needs, to get their emotional needs met, the child could perceive that that's something wrong with them. And it might, in fact, have absolutely nothing to do with them. It's the fact that the parent has to work 2 jobs in order to pay bills. So the situation can be dysfunctional and problematic, but the child can also be perceiving things in a problematic way. And of course, a lot of this stuff doesn't come to light until we're much older. We're much older, and then it's sort of like, oh, okay, this is what it means to kind of address these childhood wounds and assessing our vulnerabilities and examining our boundaries and standards and kind of our self-talk and where our patterns are, where our patterns in life are. It's very, very telling. What are your patterns with friendships? It's not uncommon at all for people to start, like I said earlier, it's like pulling a string on a sweater, or people start examining. They're like, at first they like, Dana, it's this problematic relationship. It's this one. Oh my goodness, I'm so glad I got away from this narcissistic person. And 9 out of 10 times, when they start watching these videos, they start educating themselves about narcissism, they start realizing, they're like, wait a minute, like Bob was saying earlier, there's actually quite a few people in my life that are highly problematic. And then they start backing things up a little bit more, and they're like, you know what? I think I've dated a few people that were really narcissistic. And in fact, I think my mom might have been too. And you know what? Actually, my best friend from high school was too, but I never saw it as abusive because they were a friend and not a significant other. Or especially for men, I think that's the added challenge too for men, is this idea of that men aren't in abusive that can't be in abusive relationships because of how society talks about abuse, with the man being the abuser and the woman being the victim. So there's so many different dynamics to it, but none of this is your fault. And you are lovable. I'm sure there's lots of really great things about you. So narcissists they tend to go for the best. So he saw something in you. And I'm sure there's lots of other people that have sincere motivations and intentions that can see there's lots of good things about you. And I think that's part of the road to healing too, is also acknowledging those good things within yourself. So I would encourage you to take some time and really do some journaling about, what do you like about yourself? Like, what makes you unique? What are some character traits that you really like? Like, are you really good with animals? Are you compassionate? Are you considerate? Are you, I don't know, great at sewing? Are you creative? Are you a good painter? Like, kind of, what are some of your strengths? And to start thinking about that and giving those more attention and appreciation, because that's you. Like, that's what makes you uniquely you. Lori says, it's so hard to get help for the PTSD when you try and tell a therapist it originated from narcissistic abuse and they say it's not in the DSM, so it's not real. Then they tell you to stay away from support groups. I would find a different therapist if that's the kind of stuff that you're encountering, because you shouldn't have to argue for your reality. And I get that they're not familiar with those terms, but abuse is very real. And there are 7 different types of abuse. And it's important that a therapist is familiar with every single type and how they all fit together, and not just thinking of abuse in terms of physical abuse. I'm also not, I understand, like I get why a lot of therapists are not a fan of support groups, because a lot of therapists, I think, come from the mindset of let's focus on what we do have control over, which is ourselves, and let's have the focus be on, your healing. Whereas support groups tend to be the focus is on the narcissist. I get that that's problematic. And this actually was a total issue in our support group today because of me. But a big stage in healing is people examining what happened to them and examining what is narcissism, what are the behaviors, what happened. And so there is this preoccupation with the abusive partner, and that can last. It totally varies from person to person. Some people, I've had people that have come across my videos and they're like, you know what, Dana, I like after the third or fourth video, they're like, I got it, and that was the validation and clarity I needed, and boom, I was done. Like mystery solved. I knew what I was dealing with, and it was abusive, and I was out of there. And they had been going through it for long enough that they were like, I don't care about my ex. Like now that I realize it's abuse and that this person's been gaslighting me for all these years, and this has been projection, and this has all been, I just got caught up in somebody's pathological behavior. They're like, I want to focus on me. And so they might not even be interested in talking about this narcissistic ex. Whereas what's more common, I mean, that's an exception by far, but what's more common is people get in there and they're like, wait a minute, what? Like you too? You went through that and this is what's going on, and oh my gosh. And so people oftentimes spend hours upon hours every single day researching this and reading about this and watching YouTube videos and messaging other people in support groups, and it literally goes 24 hours a day. I think it's a part in healing. People need to understand it's like getting trampled by a unicorn, right? Like you're like, WTF. You kind of want to figure out like what on earth happened here. And so, it's confusing. So a lot of people really need that research stage in order to understand. It's part of it. And then people tend to move forward in time. This is part of the PTSD too. So it's that level of anxiety and that hypervigilance of, I was just really hurt. I don't know who to trust. I don't know how to keep myself safe. I keep attracting these people. I feel like everybody's a narcissist. I want to stay away from everybody, and I don't know what to do. And so it's normal, right? So you think about it. Okay, people are like, something just awful really happened to me. I got caught up in this for a month or a year or 10 years or however long, 50 years. And I don't know, I don't know what's real anymore. I don't know what's safe. I don't trust my reality. I don't trust other people. And so they're terrified, and they're researching in an attempt to try to keep themselves safe. Totally understandable when you view it from that perspective. It's hard to explain that to a person who's never been through a psychologically abusive relationship. They just don't get it. In their mind, if abuse is only physical, it's this thought of, well, but now this person that was beating you is now gone. So what's the problem? Like, yay, right? They're gone. And now you can move forward into being happy and not being physically abused. But it's, like I was saying before, the physical abuse is only part of it. The psychological abuse is what does the most damage, and it's the hardest to treat because it's the hardest to see. And people that have gone through it don't even realize what they've gone through. They just think they're crazy. And they're like, I don't know. I just have trust issues. I feel anxious. I feel depressed. I don't want to be around other people. And they don't know what's going on. So if they're with a therapist who's not able to validate that, which I think that's the vast majority of them out there, finding somebody that's really, truly understands emotional and psychological abuse, it can be a challenge. And this is not to knock therapists. I think if you can get a good one, they're hands down worth their weight in gold. But it's just like finding any other good professional. So it can be a challenge, and it can take a person several times of going to different therapists to find the right one. But Yeah, so from the outside looking in, support groups seem really dysfunctional. Like, wow, these people are really marinating in their pain. They're focusing on the narcissist, they're focusing on they're rehashing every single event. What's really going on is it's a bunch of people that have gone through psychological abuse. They don't know which side is up. They don't know what happened. And once their brain realizes this is what's going on, it's not you and you're not crazy, their brain starts pulling apart event by event because they start seeing things with a fresh set of eyes. They're like, oh, wait a minute. So that one time that they said that they were on a business trip, or that they said that they had cancer, but then they really didn't, like this was why. And so their brain goes back and starts playing event by event by event, and it's rehashing it, it's pulling it apart, examining it, and putting it back together again. It's reprocessing this whole relationship. And so this can take time. And it's part of healing. But if a person's not familiar with trauma, and if they don't realize that these kind of events, they leave a person feeling very fragmented. And so you have to put together all of the pieces again. Then yes, support groups look incredibly dysfunctional. They're not. It's a part of the process, and there's no way around it. Like, it's a very needed part of the process. So either this person sits in their room by themselves and rehashes events by themselves, or they're doing so in like a group setting and they're getting a lot more aha moments and a lot more clarity. But again, to an outside person, they're like, whoa, this is like way dysfunctional. These people are in here 24/7 talking about everything that abusive that's ever happened to them. But it's not dysfunctional. It's part of the healing process. People do tend to move out of that phase and into more, and then anger, I would say, once they really start putting the pieces together, intense amounts of anger, justified, righteous anger. And then there's that stage. And again, it's sort of like the different stages of grief. Like, there's all these different stages. Everybody, it's not a linear line. People go through different stages, and it's just kind of this process. And so a person might go from kind of researching to rehashing to anger to acceptance to back to rehashing, back to anger, back to acceptance. And there's probably a few other stages in there. And they just kind of, bounce around those different stages. And then over time, they are able to put together all of the pieces of this and create a more cohesive narrative about what happened, what's really going on. And now, once they create that cohesive story, their brain's able to put together all of those pieces in a way that now makes sense. Now they're able to actually move forward and start really rebuilding this life. But it's hard. Yeah, like, it looks really problematic from the outside looking in. Yeah, that's a great point. Lori says, in Pete Walker's PTSD book, well, the world was thought to be flat until it was found to be round. Yes, it's so true. We give so much credit to our current state of like science or medicine or psychiatry or what have you. And the reality is that stuff changes all of the time. So like, what we take as absolute truth 5 years from now tends to be like, oh, actually, we were totally wrong about that. Like, it happens all the time. So just because something's not in the DSM doesn't mean that it doesn't exist. It just means, or even if it is in the DSM, doesn't mean it exists. It's our current state of understanding of things. I mean, you think about it, wasn't that long ago when doctors recommended smoking, or numerous x-rays for pregnant women. Or there's just no shortage of things that people, it's an evolution, right? So like with everything, with science and with, medicine and with psychology and everything. It's just this emotion. And so once we find out new information, then we can take action on that new information. So I'm a big fan of results. Like what's actually getting a person results, and what's the most empowering course of action that they can take. Because to me, that's what's important. Labels can be great. I think they're pointers to things. And behaviors tend, especially in psychology, behaviors tend to not change. That tends to be pretty fixed. So it's the behaviors that are important to focus on, not the labels. So, okay, I totally forgot. I have a bunch of questions here. So let me get to these, and we'll go from there. So this one is from, we'll call her Kiko. Kiko says, "Dear Dana, my question is, what do I say and how can I explain to people the abusive relationship I went through? I have friends who also know about this narcissist, and in the past 8 months, I found it really hard to say briefly and explain as we know it because no one understands. But now I am moving through and healing and getting social again with people after 7 months. I need to find words and sentences that are understandable to normal people to believe who this narcissistic person is and what he's really like behind the mask. I found myself imagining phrases like, well, imagine a crazy person who is really evil and nothing he says is real. He is just there to use every piece of you. He cheats, lies, manipulates, but they kind of act like someone normal, like psychopaths in a movie. Well, that is what it's like. So any advice would be really good on this, as I do want to defend myself and speak out and speak my truth, and if I don't, there will be a lot of anger if I try to minimize my situation. Thank you." So I like the way that you said that. I would encourage you to describe it just the way that you did. I think using terminology in terms of cheating, lying, describing the behavior, cheating, lying, manipulating, Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde, he kind of wears a mask. He pretends to be one thing, but was very different. And you could potentially use terms like emotionally abusive but again, most people, unless they've been in an abusive relationship, they just don't get it. So they also realize that if they've never been through it, they're not going to understand it. And trying to get them to understand it can be a whole exercise in crazy making and frustration for you. So I would stick to whatever explanation you feel you need to, but also realize you can't make them validate you, because these things are hard to explain. Like, unless you'd lived it, you probably wouldn't understand it either, right? It would be like, wait, what are you talking about? Or because to people that haven't lived it, it's like, oh, you're being dramatic. Like, this person's not really a narcissist. Like, they're not really a sociopath or a psychopath. They just don't get what you're dealing with is so outside the realm of normal behavior. It's frustrating. So I would encourage you to kind of pick and choose your battles, define your experience in the way that you feel comfortable with, and then also kind of trying to release that expectation that they're going to understand. Okay, question from 999. He says, "Hey, thank you. I want to say thank you, and I didn't feel right posting it on the YouTube channel. You said something in a video about the intensity of a relationship and how hard it is to forget that. I always felt really weird and kind of crazy because I went out with a narcissist for just a month, and I understood that there was something wrong. I left. I never got back into it, but I swear I'm still haunted by it. It's been more than 3 years, and I feel crazy. But seeing your video, it was really helpful hearing somebody relate to the intensity that these people can put you through. The sex was insanely good, deeply intense, and combined with all the mental tricks, it just left some sort of mark on me. Probably like people who have done crack cocaine or some other heavy drug, which alters brain chemistry. Other relationships have felt flat or boring or so not magnetic since then. I've always felt crazy after that. I feel lots better having heard you say something similar. Thank you so much. Cheers for all your great work. Thanks. Yes. So I think what can help with this too is to realize that that level of connection is not sincere. So it's manufactured. It's a manufactured level of intensity. It's a manufactured level of that soulmate connection. Very much like an online dating scam where they come on fast and furious to their target, and it's promises of everything. Like, oh, I really want to take care of the one that I love, and I'm looking for a relationship, and I love children, and I just, I want to be there for you, and I want to grow old together. And then it's just talk, 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 talk. It's just all of this future faking. When that stuff's done in person, and you're with this person who's not only telling you everything that you want to hear, but they've become kind of this like social chameleon where they've morphed into being your perfect partner because they're mirroring you back to you. So all of these things that you like, they're mirroring that back to you. And so it's really hard to kind of wrap your mind around that when you feel like this person was highly problematic, but man, the connection I had with them was super intense. I'm sure people that get caught up in dating scams feel the exact same way. Like they feel like they've met their soulmate, but it's because it's manufactured. A normal person can't compare to that. A normal person is not going to create this whirlwind situation and be and say and do everything that you need because they're not looking to exploit your vulnerabilities. So I think realizing that it's not real can help a person to just realize, okay, I can't use this relationship as kind of the guideline for which I'm going to measure every other person in my life, because that'll set a person up to fail because you're comparing it to this impossibly high, this imaginary standard, this manufactured standard. So seeing it clearly for what it is and realizing when you're with the right person, because it's confusing intensity with sincerity. So that love bombing creates that level of intensity, which is intoxicating. If a person has an empty bucket, otherwise it comes across as highly problematic. Sincere actions where a person really likes you for you, right? They know you, they like you, they appreciate you. It's that feeling of mutuality. This kind of stuff, it takes time to grow, and that level of because that's intimacy. Like that's true intimacy, is really getting to know a person and appreciating them for who they are and being okay with what they're not. That feeling that when you're around them creates a sense of, I don't know, like deep appreciation, calm, a sense of peace or acceptance. And once we, I think, can readjust our radar to be like, that is a good metric in which to kind of, gauge a person by, like, how do I feel empowered? Do I feel inspired? Do I feel accepted? Do I feel nourished? Do I feel supported? Do I feel safe? Do I feel a sense of calm? Do I feel a sense of peace? How do I feel when I'm with this other person? And, do they treat me with dignity and respect? And is there trust? And is there honesty? And all of these things take time to actually to see if they're there for the long run. But once those character traits can become your new metric, then I think we'll have a much easier time with moving forward. It's when we're using that manufactured soulmate connection as the guide to which we judge all other people, that sets us up to fail. So I hope that helps. And great question, great comment. Okay, this is from Jazz Brown, who says, "Hi Dana, I just started listening to your channel. It's very informative." Hold on, I forgot to write. I'm trying to write down the times for these. Okay. Hi Dana, I just started listening to your channel. It's very informative. My question is, I met a narcissistic female on Facebook. A lot of emotional ups and downs for the past year. I went no contact and it's been 7 or 8 months now. She unfriended me about 3 months ago and has been no contact. I haven't heard from her since. My question is, will she try to resurface? Well, it's hard to say what another person's going to do, but I think it's good to prepare yourself emotionally for the strong possibility that she might. So what do I mean by that? I mean, writing out your for when you miss her list. Because nostalgic is a tricky thing and it can surface at any time. Even if we think, oh, no, like I'm never going back to that person, no. If we're feeling lonely, if we're feeling curious, like, well, maybe she's not really a narcissist. Like maybe I was wrong, or maybe it's kind of just this weird, sick kind of curiosity to just curious. Like you just want to kind of reopen communication to just to see. Because again, it's like being trampled by a unicorn. Like there's just kind of this weird fascination with what happened. So to prepare yourself for this, because nostalgia, it's a slippery slope into getting sucked back into into being used, abused, or exploited. So writing out your for when you miss her list. And in that list, in like a bullet point format, you write down every single thing as to why you don't want this woman in your life. Somebody else had recommended you can make this into a video. I really like that. So this way you're basically making a video of everything you have on your list where it's you talking to you, and it's like your highest and best self talking to your potentially nostalgic self, saying, okay, this is why you don't want this woman in your life. She was, she lied about having a dog. She cheated on you. She, borrowed $500 and never repaid it. She, flirted with your friend in front of you. She, blah, 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 blah. It's like you're outlining your list. And so when those feelings of, if she does resurface, if nostalgia does kick in, you can go back and you're emotionally prepared for this. So you're not so knocked off balance if this does happen. And, but I wouldn't worry. And I guess too, I would make the resolution now that you're not, make the decision now that you're not going to reopen contact with her. So if you can kind of develop a plan of attack before you need one, it's a good way to go about it. So you're realizing, okay, yes, even if she does reopen contact, like I'm going to go ahead and block her on every social media account. I'm going to block her on my phone. I'm going to go ahead and set up all of her email addresses to go straight to spam. And I'm not even going to check nothing. Like I'm going no contact. And so then once you kind of have your emotional plan in place, then release worrying about it. Because worry, it feels productive, but it's not. So there's no sense in worrying about it. I really would encourage you to try to redirect that energy into something positive, into finding more joy in your life, finding more empowering people, not letting this woman steal any more of your joy or your happiness. Like just shutting that door, but being emotionally prepared if she comes a knocking. So I hope that helps. Okay, this is from Sarah, who says, I've been with somebody who is very narcissistic. And I'm kind of wondering if this is what might be wrong, what's wrong with him. He only talks about himself. He turns everyone else's conversation into him and about himself. He neglects the needs of me and others and only serves his own interests. He has a very high opinion of himself and looks down on others less fortunate. He has repeatedly cheated on me more times I can even remember. And when he's caught, he doesn't feel sorry for cheating, only that he got caught. And he will only ever admit to what can be proved. He blames PTSD from being in the army. Can this really be the case? He went to talk to somebody for help on 2 occasions to pacify me, but then stopped and continued to cheat. It's become part of a twisted cycle of our relationship, and it's now normal for him to cheat on me and for me to take him back. Every time I do, I hate myself a little bit more. I've changed as a person and not in a good way. He tells me I'm paranoid and that I have nothing to worry about. It's knocked my confidence so much that I now think that maybe I won't be able to find anyone better and should just accept this behavior and keep quiet. My friends and family don't even know that I see him anymore, as I can't bear to put them through the pain and upset it causes each time he cheats. This feels like it's actually driving me crazy and making me neurotic. I don't know what to do with this situation anymore. Any advice or suggestions? Okay, yeah, there's lots of things I wanted to chime in on this. So you mentioned you're not sure if you can do any better. I would say I think you'd be hard pressed to do much worse. If you're in a relationship where you hate yourself more and more every day, then that's definitely a problem. And nothing right there, like that alone, nothing is worth your mental health and the relationship that you have with yourself. So that's highly problematic. And the second point is, could his cheating be due to PTSD from the army? No, those things don't go hand in hand. I mean, he could be cheating for coping, but let's just give him the benefit of the doubt. Let's just say sure that it is his cheating is due to his PTSD, which I don't buy for a second, but let's just say that it is. If it is due to his PTSD, he's not highly motivated. He's not motivated at all to actually resolve his PTSD or to get treatment for it, right? So he went to somebody twice and then stopped going. So even if it is due to PTSD, it sounds like it's not going to be changing anytime soon. And so his behavior is not going to be changing anytime soon because he's not open to actually getting treatment for it. So that's a problem. Number 3, you're not paranoid. If a person, it's normal for you to have trust issues if he's got cheating issues. Like that's completely reasonable. I think anybody would have issues with that. It's completely justified. So it's not you. Okay, next one. His behavior is abusive, and any one of these things is a deal breaker. So please just realize that a person that is continuing to cheat on you, lie to you, you're feeling continually ground down. You can't even talk to your friends and family about your relationship because they can't bear to see you go through this again. These are all major red flags and highly problematic. You say that you're confused and you don't know what to do, but wish you. Oh, wait, what did you say? I think you said you just don't know what to do. And I just wanted to say that you do know what to do, but wish you didn't. That's where confusion happens when people are stuck in cognitive dissonance and they're in denial of what is. That's where that confusion comes from. Confusion comes from, it's when we know what we need to do, but wish we didn't. So when we keep denying the reality of the situation, because again, remember we talked about earlier, so if our thoughts have to line up with our actions, if the action is I want to stay, then we have to pick the thought that's in alignment with that. So then the thought has to be with this relationship is workable and I can stay. But in order for you to pick that thought, you're going to have to really do some mental gymnastics to justify what you're experiencing. So then you're going to have to tell yourself, well, if this relationship is okay because I can stay, then that means that he's not really cheating. So it's like we're gaslighting ourselves at that point, right? So you're trying to convince yourself, well, maybe I do have trust issues. Because to actually admit that, no, I don't have trust issues, he has cheating issues. If you admit that, then that means that you can't stay. So you also mentioned, well, I guess an option would be I just keep quiet and accept it. Well, okay, you could pick that thought of, well, I'm just going to keep quiet and accept it, then I can stay. But the mental leap you're going to have to make with that is you're going to have to become okay with having anxiety, having ongoing depression, not talking about what's going on with your relationship with your friends and family, hating yourself more and more every day, and in buying his lies and his manipulations in order for you to stay. So that's going to be the cost of keeping quiet and being okay with what you're experiencing. So I know it's not easy to leave, and I know that and it's so common to have mental anguish with leaving a situation, because no matter how unhealthy a relationship is, odds are a person's getting some of their needs met. So if a person's been really lonely for any length of time, they can find a lot of comfort in just another person being there. Or if you've been with this person for a long time and there's a routine, change in general, human beings in general, we're not, like, it's kind of this double-edged sword. We're wired for consistency, but yet at the same time, life is all about growth and change. So we're kind of always in this battle of consistency or change, consistency or change. Change is always scary. We're wired that way. It's not just you. Change is always scary. So it can be really tough to actually walk away from a situation that's not serving us. But it can be tough to walk away. And this is where it's sort of like, okay, where is the pain greater? Is the pain greater with walking away, or is the pain greater with staying? And it's something to really think about, because odds are he's not going to change. You do know what you need to do. You do know what you are experiencing. And it's kind of really getting crystal clear with yourself of where is the line in the sand? Like, at what point do you say, you know what, I've had enough. I can't do this anymore. It's costing me my mental health. Like, I need to get out. I think once you can get clear with yourself about that and formulate a plan, because if we have a plan in place, then it's less scary, because it's change. It's more of the fear of the unknown. So if we can make the unknown as known as possible, and just troubleshoot some ideas. Okay, well, if I were to move out, where could I go? Could I go stay with this friend or this family member? Or, oh, okay, well, then what else could I do? I could maybe go start this job over here, or this is how I could go about, maybe I could stay there for 3 months or 6 months and save up some money. Or maybe I could, if I moved out, this is how I would do it. And you just start thinking about it and realizing you don't have to act on this tomorrow. Okay, so try to not get yourself into that panic mode where you just shut down and slip back into denial again. And to just think, okay, if, hypothetically speaking, if I were to go about leaving, what are some ways I could do this? And then you start brainstorming that plan, and then you'll know. Like, you'll know. Like, you'll get to that point where there is no more wondering. The pain is going to be greater one way or the other. And then you're going to have the clarity that you need. And then hopefully you're going to have some sort of plan in place as to what direction you go with that. So I hope that helps. Oh, and in the meantime too, I would highly recommend that you join a support group, because that you're going to get a ton of validation and support. And it's also nice, I think, to see people at a wide range of healing. Not only healing, but understanding in a wide range of situations. So, and I would encourage you to join a few of these different support groups, and again, see which ones kind of resonate best with you. So for example, in my support group, there's people that are still in the relationship. There's people that are fresh out of the relationship. There's people that have been out for a month, a year, 10 years, longer. And so there's just a wide variety of people. And so it can be very validating and give a lot of clarity if you're like, you know what, if you're seeing, because we all have basically different versions of the same story. And so when you're seeing what other people are going through or have gone through, it can really spark a lot of different aha moments. And then you also have that reassurance of you're not alone in this. Like, you're really, really not alone in this. And so if you're reading about it and you're like, well, you know what? Gosh, if she can do it or if he can do it, then I can too. And it just kind of creates a sense of community and camaraderie. Like, you're not in this alone. And that can be really helpful, because these situations can be so isolating. Like you just said, not talking to friends and family because you're embarrassed. So I hope that helps. Okay. This question comes from Sunflower, who says, okay, Dear Dana, I have an interesting question that I haven't heard anyone address on any of the forums. I often think back to pivotal times early on with my narcissistic ex about what I could have done differently in that moment that would have possibly thwarted the ensuing relationship. In every instance, my gut yelled, run, even way before I even knew about narcissism. And in every instance, I made every effort in my power to shake the snake and nip it in the bud. But in every instance, I was unable to. When I think back, the only thing I could have done differently was call the police. Of course, I never did that because who calls the police on a super hot, charismatic guy? Yes, he is displaying obvious social and personal boundary violations. However, there was absolutely no reason at that point to fear for my safety. Each and every time, that is what stopped me. Each and every time, that person ended up ruining my life in one way or the other. It started for me in college. And in this last and most recent one of 6 years, put the last nail in the coffin. I am 50 years old now, and I've been no contact with this deadly shark for 15 months now. Thank God for restraining orders. Also, I moved out of the state and told no one of my whereabouts, not even my family. My phone number also changed 3 times in the past 5 months, which doesn't hurt. He has honored the restraining order because he is married and it scared him. Shortly before I filed the restraining order, I made a phone call to his wife at work and told her. I have to say, when I occasionally indulge in finding something about them on social media, I am of course hurt, but also amazed and bewildered at all of the happy, genuinely smiling faces on him, his wife, and now his adult children. They are a close-knit family and live a fabulous lifestyle, and clearly all the children and friends love him by their many comments. The wife looks happy. So my secondary question is, how can this be? So, okay. What was the first question? I don't know if there was a first question. Second question, okay, how can it be? How can it be that they are so happy? For starters, social media is not real. Like it's not an accurate measure of what's really going on in a person's life. What you're seeing is a highly edited version of like their highlight reel. So it's all of their happiest moments, right? Like birthdays and vacations and, you know, the best pictures and all of it. What you're seeing in that, oh my gosh, talk about setting a person up for failure, because you're seeing, if we're comparing yourself, like your reality, which, you know, most people's reality is like not glamorous, it's not sexy, it's not, I mean, it's, you know, routine. You know, like if you're eating cereal for breakfast and you're scrolling through and they're on a cruise in the Mediterranean, you know, of course you're like, oh man, my life is terrible. Like it's a really easy way to feel terrible about yourself. So don't compare yourself to what you see on social media. It's not real, for starters. And second, I'm sure his wife has gone through hell and with him and has continued to hold on to things and continue to take him back and do all of this because probably the good times are really good. And so she glosses over the bad times, telling herself what most people tell themselves, right? Like given enough communication or understanding or love or therapy or rehab or religion, that he really could change. And if he's doing a really great job at future faking and saying all the right things and doing all the right things and really acting the part that he's changed, which in fact it's not, you know, obviously he's only getting better at hiding his behavior, then she's holding on to hope that this time is really the last time that she's going to find out that he's had a double life. And of course it's not, because people very rarely change. They just tend to become more of what they already are. So, you know, how can you be happy? Like you can't be happy when you don't trust your partner, especially if you know when you've got this person's actively working against you. What you're seeing is denial on her end, and realize too that she's been deeply manipulated, like you were, like probably a lot of other women have been with this guy. So there is no happy relationship without trust, bottom line, and without a person being treated with dignity and respect. And their relationship's not real. It's all smoke and mirrors. And that's going to come crashing down. It sounds like, you know, it came crashing down with you. It's going to come crashing down again. and she's going to keep denying it, unfortunately, until she experiences enough pain that she fully realizes this guy's really not going to change and I need to get out of here. But it's hard when they're so covert like that, and they are so charming, and the good times are so good. A lot of people struggle with that. They're like, boy, I really wish he'd call me a bunch of names, or that she'd hit me, or that there was something more concrete that they could point at and see and say, see, that's a problem. Because when the good times are so good and they are so charming, if the bad times aren't so concrete, especially if it's kind of more he said, she said stuff and she's in denial, if, like we talked about earlier, like if her action is to be, I'm going to stay in this relationship, she's going to have to pick a thought that goes with it. So she can't pick the thought that my husband's a psychopath, right? And runs around and cheats on me every chance he gets. She's going to have to pick the thought of the other woman's lying about this, or the other woman is psycho, or the other woman is threw herself at him. She's going to have to pick the thought that matches her action. And then try to stuff her real feelings, what she really knows is going on deep down. And people do this all the time. Then they become anxious and they become depressed, and then they start trying to numb out, and then they're on antidepressants and they're drinking and they're doing all these things because they don't want to face their reality. So, all right, this is another question from another person by the name of Flower, who says, Dear Dana, my ex and I had a very explosive breakup. I don't know if I think he believes that I am a covert narcissist. He walked away from our 2 children, and 5 months after he left, he came back to fight for custody of our children. In a court, he stated I was a sick person. He claimed I was a sex addict and that I sold myself on the internet, and that I would fill my days with having sex with men. Dana, I will not deny I lived a life of promiscuity before I met him. Throughout our 7-year relationship, we went through 3 breakups. I made the mistake of befriending a guy on Messenger, and our conversations carried into my marriage. My ex discovered this and he grew angry. His jealousy grew so much that his mind had him truly believing that I was unfaithful. He even sent me to a DNA test because he was so sure our little one was a product of my affair with the guy I chatted with. It was very hurtful to hear that he was telling friends and family that I was a narcissist and a prostitute and a sex addict. It's been almost a year since he left, and still he makes comments about me being with other men and that I preferred sex over our family. I left my state to get away from all of his crazy making, and when weekend Skype calls with our children, if the connection would go wrong or something would happen, he would put me down and call me names. I admit I did him wrong for carrying on this conversation with the man through our relationship. Our relationship was a struggle. He never took me out or introduced me to any of his coworkers. Many of them didn't even know that he was married or that he had children. Now that I'm away, I notice many red flags that I never saw before. He always put me down for a wide variety of reasons. He would accuse me of having sex with men when I would leave to go pay bills, go to the doctor, go grocery shopping. Dana, I never left my house without our children. How can I let him know that he needs help? I am at fault for hurting his pride and breaking his trust in me, but he needs help. He made statements in court that I hired a hitman and that my father and brother were out to get him. He continues to post videos, once about, once a cheater, always a cheater, and that I was a sex addict. He doesn't want to admit that he has a problem with his jealousy. I even subscribed to your channel from his video post because I guess her ex was watching some of my videos, or videos on narcissism in general. I had even subscribed to your channel to self-analyze myself, as I was wondering if I am this monster that he posts about. I know I'm not an easy person to get along with, and that I was at my breaking point of him not working for... Oh, I was at my breaking point. Okay. But he always walked away from every argument. I realize now that we had poor communication. I love him so much. When we were together, I ignored all the red flags of his verbal abuse. I lost friends and family because he made people feel ignored and saw people as below him. How can you let him or other people see that they have a problem and that it's not the opposite partner? Yeah, this is so weird. So when a lot of people that are in a relationship with a narcissist, because they've justified their behavior to themselves. I think many of them, deep down, they know that that's not true, but they really are working overtime to convince themselves that it is true. So, you know, there could be some more stuff going on with him. I mean, he could have some kind of, paranoia or some mental illness kind of stuff going on. I can see why you're concerned. It's concerning stuff. What can you do to get him help? Nothing, unfortunately, because he's not going to take it well coming from you. He's going to see it as an attack. He's going to see it as a smear campaign. Even if you were to potentially contact his friends and family, which it sounds like you aren't really close to them, it's not going to go over well. Like anything that you do that he perceives as some sort of threat to him, he's going to perceive it as an attack. So I think it's one of those things you have to realize, okay, I like that you have accountability for your part in things. You're like, you know what? I should not have been talking to this other man while I was married. I shouldn't have befriended this other man while I was married. I shouldn't have, for sure, not continue to talk to him. That really fanned the flames. It really caused a huge narcissistic injury with him. Your ex sounds incredibly jealous and incredibly controlling, and that there's probably a lot more going on there. It's one of those things you can't get him to change. You can't get him the help that he needs to get. Unfortunately, only he can do that. I mean, even if you were to, let's say, think, okay, maybe this guy is paranoid, maybe he's mentally ill. Let's just kind of tease this situation out. Even if you were to go that route and, let's say, call a family member, call non-emergency police and say, this guy is really not well. Like, can you please do like a welfare check on him and just make sure he's okay? I don't think he's well. Even if they were to do that, even if he were to get committed somewhere for like a psychiatric evaluation, which probably wouldn't happen because insurance companies don't like to pay for that unless it's a pretty slam dunk kind of thing. Even if that were to happen, they can't hold him against his will. So he would only be in there in order to get evaluated. He'd still have to be, and even if a therapist or a psychiatrist were to say, yes, this is what's going on, you have, I don't know, XYZ, right? Even if they were to tell him that, it doesn't matter unless he's highly motivated to actually change it. If he's so worked up in his mind that you're the problem, he's probably not going to see anything other than that. So it's hard. It's hard to just accept a person's behavior for what it is and to realize that we don't have the power to change them. And all you can do is all you can do. I think your time and energy would be better spent potentially trying to do damage control with your children. So if he still has Skype calls with them and you're out of state and this kind of thing, potentially being aware of like what is being said. Does he see the children 2 weeks over the summer or every other holiday or those kinds of things? Really keeping open, honest, sincere, solutions-oriented communication with your children to see what is he saying to them. Is he filling their minds with all kinds of stuff? Is he saying a bunch of inappropriate things about you? If that's the case, there's a great book out there called Divorce Poison. I really think any divorced person should read it. It's fantastic. The notes for that are on my website under book club if you want to read the notes on it. And it talks about how to deal with another partner who's manipulative and abusive, and how to ideally raise children in the healthiest way possible to where they feel comfortable talking about things, to where, parental alienation kind of stuff, you can work towards minimizing that. Because when you have a parent that's so angry and they're so manipulative and abusive, oftentimes what happens is they start turning the children against the other parent as well. So it would definitely be worth your time and energy reading up on different kind of strategies to prevent possible parental alienation and manipulation of your children. And with that also said, it might also be worth, I don't know what the rules are in your state, it would be worth contacting an attorney and seeing about potentially recording some of these Skype calls, documenting things within, keeping your conversations limited to like ideally text messages, voicemail, email, Skype if you can record it. So if his behavior continues like this, or if it escalates and it does become problematic, if you do have to go back to court, you can show this is the kind of stuff that he's doing. And it's a lot easier versus a he said, she said type of a situation. So I hope that helps. Okay, this one is from Shar, who says, Dear Dana, so about 1 a.m. last night, my narcissistic partner gets home and starts fondling my breasts and rubbing me. At that point, I thought my best option was to not move and pretend to be asleep. Well, he tried at it for an hour. By then, my whole left side of my body was numb from laying absolutely still for that long. At 6 a.m., he wakes up and noticed that I changed positions and he tried at it again. Once again, I laid still playing possum. Only 30 minutes this time. He finally went upstairs, and at about 7:30 a.m., I get up to use the bathroom, and he must have heard me. I hurried up and got back into bed. He comes running downstairs, opens the door, and says, Hey, are you awake? At that point, I just gave in. He said, Did you hear me come in last night? And I kept saying no. And he says, Well, do you remember me doing this and that to you? And I kept saying no. I didn't want him to know I was faking being asleep. He said, Do you remember me touching your face? Then he said with a laugh, I don't know how anyone could sleep through them touching them. I guess my question is this sexual abuse? Yes, it is. So here's some definitions of this. And this kind of stuff, it can be tricky. So anything that's with partners, being really assertive and saying, this is what is okay with me. This is what is not okay with me. I'm not up for being touched at all, groped, especially any of that while I'm sleeping. Like that's not okay with me. Because some people are okay with that. And so I think it's really important for people to be really clear, like I'm not okay with this. But if in doubt, the other person should err on the side of caution and be like, I'm not going to start touching my partner sexually or doing sexual things to them when they're asleep. Like that's just not cool. So here's some definitions for you. So according to the American Psychological Association, the definition of sexual abuse is any unwanted sexual activity with a perpetrator using force, making threats, or taking advantage of a person not able to give consent. So under the influence or asleep. Most victims and perpetrators know each other, and immediate reactions to sexual abuse include shock, fear, or disbelief. So a more expanded definition of sexual abuse comes from a website that I really liked, was called Pandora's Project, whose aim is to give support and resources to survivors of rape and sexual abuse. Their definition of sexual abuse is any sort of non-consensual sexual contact. Sexual abuse can happen to men or women of any age, and sexual abuse by a partner can include derogatory name-calling, a refusal to use contraception, deliberately causing unwanted physical pain during sex, deliberately passed on sexual diseases or infections, or using objects, toys, or other items without consent or in order to cause pain or humiliation. The definition of sexual assault, according to the Department of Justice, is sexual assault is any type of sexual contact or behavior that occurs without the explicit consent of the recipient. Falling under the definition of sexual assault are sexual activities such as forced sexual intercourse, forcible sodomy, child molestation, incest, fondling, and attempted rape. So based on those definitions, yes, it would be considered sexual abuse. And like I'd mentioned before, I think, setting a boundary with him and letting him know, like, if you feel comfortable that you can. So, and if you don't feel comfortable, then kind of considering, okay, what would be some alternatives in your situation? And I think, it's worth exploring it. It might be worth you kind of reading up on more of this as well, and possibly talking to other people that have gone through this and seeing, okay, how, can I try setting a boundary? What would happen if you were to tell your partner, hey, I'm not okay with being touched while I'm sleeping? Or, are you not wanting to be physical with him at all? Or do you still want him to be your partner? Or, there's a lot more context that I think would be pertinent to this situation. And maybe that's something that you can kind of work through in like a support group or with a therapist. Okay, this last question here is from Sienna, who says, I am so conflicted in my healing journey. I was on your Facebook page, and I know you've heard my story. But also, as a recap, I have a narcissistic mother and a very narcissistic family. Almost everyone is abusive or an enabler. I got into a bad romantic relationship that was very verbally and at times physically abusive. It pushed me to leave and seek help. That's when I found your YouTube page and began to read more on codependency. I have now been single and celibate for almost a year. I have been no contact with my family since fall, and I have been discovering my peace. I am also a Christian and feel so conflicted because it's a strong value of God's for us to love everyone. I've been thinking lately of a way I could reconnect with my family and keep healthy boundaries, but I am afraid that they will guilt me once I reach out or try to shame me. Or maybe accept me at first, but then get angry once I set a boundary. I'm the middle child of 5 and the grandchild of 12, so there are a lot of broken bridges to mend. I just don't know where to begin. I forgive them, and I know I myself had some narcissistic tendencies that I learned from them. I just want to know if true healing is really possible. So lots of great questions in that. And I think the first one being, there's alternatives to no contact. So there's no contact, and then there's what's called low contact. If a person goes low contact, if they're like, you know what, I still want some sort of relationship with these problematic people, I just can't have it be what it normally was. Like, I can't go there for 2 weeks over Christmas, but I could maybe go there for 3 days. Or maybe I could only go there for 3 hours. Or maybe I just want a phone call. And so kind of backing things up to a place where, like, okay, this is workable for me. And then moving forward. Whenever a person goes low contact, they can also go gray rock. So it's that emotional detachment where you become as reactive as a gray rock. So, and what this means is you're really preparing yourself emotionally for anything that they might say or do that will kind of throw you off balance. So preparing yourself for them to make you feel guilty or ashamed or, angry or what have you. Preparing yourself for that, and then trying to develop some sort of plan to where you can stay cool, calm, and collected when you're around them and not be so reactive. It takes practice, and it's definitely easier said than done. So, and this is one of those things where if you do decide to reopen contact, it's a lot of trial and error. It's kind of figuring out, okay, well, to what extent and to like what works for you and like what doesn't work for you. And you will know. Like, you'll know because you're like, you'll get to the place where you're like, this is way too much. This was a mistake. I need to kind of reel things in a little bit to where I can't do the 2 weeks at Christmas, but next time I'm going to try maybe 3 days, or maybe next time I'm going to try 3 hours. And you just kind of continually fine tune things until you're at a place where like, okay, this is what's working for me. And odds are you're going to continue to readjust that as time progresses, because you're going to be changing, they're going to be changing for the better or for the worse. People go through life. So those boundaries, your boundaries are always going to be in a state of flux, because we are always in a state of flux and life is in a state of flux. So to revisit that periodically and see what might need to change with this situation. Second part of that is loving people unconditionally. Loving everybody unconditionally doesn't mean that you need to be abused and put up with problematic behavior unconditionally. And it also doesn't mean that you're also included in that. So if you're going to love everybody unconditionally, that means loving yourself unconditionally as well. So, which means not putting yourself in harm's way. And this is what it goes back to what I was talking about with finding that balance of, this is what works for me. This is where I can maintain, if you're choosing to maintain contact, this is where I can still do this and keep a place where I'm feeling safe and sane. And if I'm not feeling that way, then asking yourself, okay, what needs to change? Instead of going in there and being like, okay, well, I just need to love everybody unconditionally. And that means I guess I'm just going to have poor boundaries and apologize for everything. Let them just kind of drag me through the dirt here and make me feel guilty and ashamed and be cruel to me because you have boundaries. Like that's not loving yourself to put yourself through hell. So, and you also mentioned forgiveness. How did you put this? I forgive them, and I know I myself had some narcissistic tendencies that I learned from them. So with forgiving, there's two concepts I want to talk about with that. There's forgiveness does not mean, forgiving does not mean forgetting, okay? So, and forgiving doesn't mean saying that you're okay with what happened. What forgiveness means is that you're making the conscious decision to release anger towards people that have done you wrong. You can forgive a person and not reopen contact. You can forgive a person and continue to have whatever boundaries that you feel that you need to have with them. So forgiveness does not mean forgetting. It does not mean having to reopen contact. It does not mean letting this person back into your life. Forgiveness is about releasing anger. The other part to this is, acceptance versus allowance, which is kind of the second part of forgiveness. Acceptance of who they are, really seeing them clearly, seeing their behavior clearly, and then creating a plan to where you can respond appropriately instead of reacting. So when you can accept a person for who they are, you're like, okay, this is my mom, like this is what she does. And so when you start accepting it instead of wishing it was different, then you can start using the power of anticipation and developing a plan. So if you know, okay, every Christmas my mom corners me in the kitchen and tells me everything that's wrong with me, right? So if that's just an example, like if that's what's going on, accepting this is what she does and not living in denial of maybe this year will be different, right? Like you're living in the moment of this is what she does. I'm accepting this. I'm releasing resistance that she's going to be any other way. Now I'm going to anticipate that she's going to do this so I can start responding to her behavior instead of reacting. So like a reaction to that would be, she says something, a bunch of mean stuff to you in the kitchen, you burst into tears, or you just smile and nod, and then you go into the bathroom and you I don't know, do a few shots of vodka, or you're like just in reaction mode, right? A response would be, okay, this is what my mom normally does, so I'm going to develop a plan, and I'm not going to go into the kitchen. I'm just going to hang out in the living room instead. Or I'm going to come over after Christmas dinner. Or I'm going to leave before Christmas dinner starts. Or you're developing a plan to somehow make this situation work for you because you deserve to treat yourself with that unconditional love as well. So you have acceptance versus allowance. So acceptance is seeing a person and their behavior clearly for what it is, releasing resistance of what you hope it could possibly be somewhere down the road, accepting it, Allowing it means being dragged through hell by all of their bad behavior and allowing them free reign in your life to just say or do whatever they want to say or do because they're family. And realizing, no, I can still have healthy boundaries with my family. Just because they're family doesn't mean that they get to abuse me or use me or exploit me or any of these things. So I hope that helps. And that's what I got for tonight. So thank you guys so much for joining me. And Mark says, Dana, did you get my email? I did. I didn't get a chance to open it, but I will tomorrow. And oops, sorry, this little bug, one left. I have these little gnats from these plants. Frustrating. So, okay guys, so I'm going to sign off. I'm going to get to bed. Thank you so much for joining me. I really appreciate it. Thank you for all of the questions. If you guys have a question that you are more comfortable emailing me directly with, please do so at deardana@thriveafterabuse, and I will see what I can do to get it on the show. So again, thank you for supporting each other. Thank you for being here. Thank you for your time. We do this every single Wednesday night at 8:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Normally runs about 2.5 hours, but I don't know. I have no concept of time. So sometimes it goes longer. Tonight it went way longer. So thank you guys for sticking around. And lots of love to you guys. So you are not alone. You are not crazy, and you really can move forward and heal from this. So take care, and I will talk to you soon, okay? Bye.